Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Simmons. As Andy said, I'm the Member of Parliament for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. And I am a member of the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services, which is the host today. Should just explain, an all-party parliamentary group is not a formal parliamentary committee. You may see the televised proceedings of some of those committees. But it's where a group of members of Parliament with an interest in an issue that affects their constituents come and work together on that issue. And this all-party parliamentary group often takes evidence and picks up issues and takes those to the Financial Conduct Authority or to parts of government with a view to changing policy or seeking redress for people. So whilst parliamentary select committees, for example, cannot take up individual cases, the purpose of this is to gather evidence so that we can address the issue at heart today, which is the activities of the Phillips Trust Corporation and the activities of like businesses and how it's affected people across the country. The main focus for the all-party parliamentary group is the behaviour of financial services providers, and then perhaps secondarily, the conduct of their regulators, the Financial Conduct Authority. In my own case, the Trust Corporation, the Phillips Trust Corporation, was brought to my attention firstly because of some family experience where relations were introduced through a building society to what initially appeared to be a will writing service that then led on to setting up a trust that would have caused them a great deal of difficulty and significant financial cost had it ever been put into effect, and required considerable legal fees to unwind it before the deaths of one of those family members, which would have activated it and created a situation. And following that, it became clear to me I had a number of constituents, and following research, became clear a number of colleagues had significant numbers of constituents who were affected by similar types of situations. So as a result, we decided it was appropriate to begin some investigations, and I'd like in particular to say thank you to Andy, who you've just heard from, and to Mark Bishop, who some of you will see on your screen, and their colleagues and acquaintances who've been doing a great deal of work through research with questionnaires to people who are affected, to provide a bedrock of what are the common issues about how people were treated, how can we identify the lines of inquiry that as members of Parliament we may then take forward with the government and with the Financial Conduct Authority, and to put together the evidence session today so we had a fair idea of what it was that affected people, and we're able then to gather some of the human stories to back that up, to make the case for the Financial Conduct Authority that much stronger. So what we're going to seek to do today, just remind everybody, as Andy said, the session is being recorded, is we're going to put these sessions, put this evidence together so that we can then share with the FCA how the conduct of the Phillips Trust Corporation and the connected parties has impacted on people's lives. And it's important for me to be clear that as parliamentarians, we can ask questions, we can publicise issues, we can hold government to account. We're not in a position to compel the FCA to do a particular thing, to follow a particular course of action. But what we can do, and we've had some success in the past, is demonstrate that this issue is sufficiently serious that they need to act. So it is very much something that's a team effort. A couple of housekeeping points. I have to ask, please, that people don't make their own recording of the session, and that's simply because everybody here has their own very personal story to tell. Some of those are about very personal, family, private issues. So that everyone can feel confident to speak freely, please can we be clear that the only audience for the evidence that's gathered today will be the Financial Conduct Authority. It's also important to say that this session is only for those affected by the Phillips Trust Corporation and the related entities. And of course, the all-party parliamentary group. So I would ask if there's anybody who's on the call who is not one of those affected parties, this is the appropriate moment to step away. And in particular, if we have parties, solicitors, for example, acting for any of those organisations, claims management companies, that sort of thing, then I'd ask you please to just step off the call at this point, because it isn't appropriate to be present for the remainder of the discussion. Now, many of the people who are on the call, and I can see lots of people on the screen who I know will have great contributions to make, kindly completed the questionnaire, which was sent out in advance. Those responses have all been looked through, And it's very clear from the work that's been done by Andy, Mark and others that some very significant patterns have emerged and some questions which we're aiming to pick up on today's session so that we can build that evidence in a structured way. Effectively, what we think is we're seeing in those patterns is that building societies had introduced companies to the will writing company, the family trust corporation, or both, and that people had not been treated fairly in that process because they'd ended up with receiving a service that was inappropriate for them, and that they'd been referred to that service by a regulated financial body. Now, to date, the narrative from the FCA has been that building societies acted purely as introducers and that would not have known, could not have envisaged about what would happen next. Now, clearly, the evidence in the questionnaire suggests that that's not the case, that not only were those organisations both owned by the estate planning group, which suggests that it was clear from the outset that people may well have been referred, but in many cases, and certainly in the case of my own family member, the building society introduction was specifically for the setting up of a trust. That was the purpose for which the introduction was made, and that took place in a building society and was witnessed by a building society member of staff. So we also know that building societies have said these are execution-only arrangements. Now, personally speaking, as someone who is by background a qualified financial advisor, I understand the significance and the implications of that. But it's very clear from the evidence in those questionnaires that there's been a high level of implied endorsement, a degree of pressure sometimes on customers from employees of building societies, and even financial services, financial advisors employed by the societies perhaps recommending and making those introductions. So it's very clear that the connections are very significant. The FCA to date has also said that building societies could not have foreseen that clients would end up being handed over from the Family Trust Corporation to the Phillips Trust Corporation. But again, we have seen a thread of testimony running through the questionnaires that shows that the two were effectively the same organisation. So it looks as though there's very strong connections there, and that really builds the case for further FCA action. It also seems that arrangements continued for quite a long period of time, certainly for some years, and we would expect that responsible organisations would be monitoring what was happening to their clients after introductions have been made to ensure that what was being done was appropriate and was safe, and that the feedback from their customers was correct. So during today's session, what we're going to do, led by Andy, who has got an idea of who's here with particular stories to tell, we'll be running through the questions that were sent out to help people to tell that story to the FCA, and in particular looking to build the evidence that helps us address the points, the rebuttal, the defence that's come back from the FCA in respect of building societies, so that we can demonstrate, for example, if there are specific and provable allegations that the building society knew that you as an individual or a member of your family would be getting or had got a family trust, that the introduction to the will writing company or family trust corporation came with a level of endorsement, perhaps a recommendation from the building society, and that they knew the family trust corporation had a one-off business model, or that they misrepresented in some way the handover between it and the Phillips Trust Corporation. The clearer we can be about the human and financial consequences, the better. And I'm again aware from that family experience how significant that was, not just in tax that might have had to be paid by bereaved people, but also the long-term implications for home ownership and other connected matters. And I've heard lots of examples of similar types of stories from other people. So Andy Agathaglu and Mark Bishop, who are here from the Transparency Task Force, will participate in the dialogue and help to structure it. Peter Grant, my colleague who's the Member of Parliament for Glen Rothes, will take over chairing the meeting around 1 p.m. I'm aware it's quite a long session, but what we're hoping is that with the structure, we'll be able to use the time effectively to give everybody the opportunity to tell the story that they have and to produce from it the evidence that we need to encourage the FCA to take further action. Peter, like me, is another Member of Parliament with a real interest in getting action on financial services misconduct and regulatory issues. And I know he's been following this case for some time. Just concluding my opening remarks, I'd like to say thank you to the Transparency Task Force for putting the event together, and the Action Group, Phillips Trust Corporation, and the administrators of it, Kroll, for publicising it so that people who may have been affected by the actions of that organisation are able to come here today and to participate. And just to be clear, although sometimes people think members of Parliament can provide legal advice, we as an all-party parliamentary group and individual MPs can't provide that advice, but we can certainly help you in bringing to the attention of the relevant authorities the action that you might be able to take. And it would be really helpful when you speak, if you'd be willing to say what your name is and which building society you were a customer of. And the reason for that is it makes it a lot easier for the FCA to understand which society your evidence is about, and also enables us to identify groups of people who may be affected and come back to you with any queries. So I hope that sounds like what people were expecting to do today, and a good use of time, that from today we will emerge with a serious piece of evidence that will encourage the FCA into action. So at this point, I think I'm going to hand back to Andy, who's going to start with the opening questions, and I look forward to hearing stories that you have to tell, and to hopefully being able to support you in getting appropriate redress in due course from the responsible bodies.
David, thank you very, very much indeed. I think you've set the scene superbly. You really have. You've already talked about some of the issues that are no doubt going to be surfacing during the course of this session. My role today is essentially to try to sort of stage, manage and organise things. I'll do that to the very best of my ability. We've got a slide deck that we're going to be using. I'll be making reference to that as we go through, to give us a bit of structure and to kind of remind us about what some of the questions are, so on and so forth. But in all honesty, the most important thing today is to, where possible, take the opportunity to tell how particular questions resonate with you, especially if there's something you're very, very keen to say, perhaps, for example, because it's over and above what might have been in the actual questionnaire itself. Okay, so some introductions. We've already heard from David. I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm proud to be the chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. My day job, as it were, is running a campaign organisation called the Transparency Task Force, which is a certified social enterprise with a mission to help to get the financial sector to behave responsibly and fairly and transparently and trustworthily, etc., etc. We'll also have Bob Blackman, MP, with us. Bob, could you please take the opportunity to introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Andy. I'm Bob Blackman, MP. I'm the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for, well, we started off as pension scams, and then we've migrated to be looking at personal finance and fairer banking. Obviously, the concern I think that all of us has, and I thank my colleague David Simmons for agreeing to chair this evidence session, is that we are in the position whereby we are getting more and more concerns about the FCA and their reluctance to investigate one of the areas that we have been pushing very strongly. As Andy and others will know on this call, we've been pressing the FCA on a number of areas to investigate the activities of different financial institutions. This is one of the areas where clearly there's an argument about whether the FCA has a duty or not, but we would, I think, all strongly argue they have a duty to investigate this and put pressure. And as David quite rightly said during his introduction, it's very important that we gather the evidence so that we can demonstrate the multitudinal element of this, that it's not just an isolated case. This is, in many cases, a coordinated use of the potential contact with customers to unfairly end up with very difficult circumstances for people on a personal level. I mean, I've had several approaches, to do similar things to what David was talking about during the opening comments, and so I welcome the evidence. Unfortunately, because of parliamentary duties I've got, I won't be able to be with you for more than till 1 o'clock. But I know this session is going to last for quite some time, and I look forward to reviewing the evidence that is gathered as a result of the presentation. Thank you.
Bob, thank you not only for being here today, but also for chairing the APPG in such a proactive and effective way. It's great that we have so many parliamentarians involved with the APPG who really are using up a lot of bandwidth that they don't have to try to represent the interests of ordinary people throughout the UK. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Grant, please do the same. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. And then we'll go to Claire, then to Andrea, then to Ian, then to Alexander, then to Mark. But first of all, Peter, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Just very briefly, I'm Peter Grant. I'm Member of Parliament for Glenrothes in Fife. I'm one of the Vice Chairs of the APPG. I've worked with Andy and the Transparency Task Force trying to disentangle far too many instances where my constituents have lost money through pension schemes, investment schemes, funeral plans, and a number of others. And the first time I spoke to Andy about this one, my first comment to him was, that sounds like a very similar way of operating to the Safe Hands funeral plans collapse. And I then did some checking up and discovered that the same person was involved with both companies. So it really can sometimes be a very small world. As far as I know, I don't have any constituents that have been affected by this one, but I do know that for every person that's contacted me directly about being involved in a particular scheme such as this, when I start putting out on Facebook asking people to come forward, there's half a dozen others will contact me then. So I'm quite sure I've got something out in my social media just now. I'm quite sure that I will find that I've got constituents who either they or sort of close relatives have been caught up in this appalling affair. Like Bob, I'm not able to stay for the full meeting. I'm going to be dropping off in a few minutes, so I'll stay connected, but with my camera off for about half an hour because I've got other stuff I need to do, but I will be in for the latter part of the meeting, and I've told David that I'll sort of stay on as host if David needs to go later on. So don't take it as personal when I turn the camera off in a few minutes' time. I won't be in my office for a wee while, but I will be back on quite soon.
Peter, thank you very, very much indeed. Claire Springle, please take the opportunity to introduce yourself, Claire. We've only known Claire for a matter of a few weeks, but it's very, very clear that Claire's been putting a huge amount of effort along with her colleagues into these issues. And from what we can see, she's been doing an absolutely first-class job. Claire, please say hello. Thank you.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity to listen to what everyone has to say today. I'm a solicitor and I've been qualified for over 20 years, specialising in this particular area of work, mainly wills, probate and trusts along the way. That's mainly because for many people, trusts just aren't appropriate. So although I advise on them, very few people ever really go ahead with them. So my job has really been to see what position clients are in, see what we can do about it to extract themselves from the trust corporation, either bringing trust to an end or appointing family members to continue the trusts. And for some clients, that's been easier than it has for others, just because of personal circumstances. So most people have a similar story to tell from the introduction from their local building society. So I'm really interested to listen to what everyone has to say today, as I'm sure their stories will be very similar to all of the clients that I've dealt with previously.
Claire, thank you very much, Claire, and your colleague Heather beside you. Let's go to Andrea, who I think many of you will already be very familiar with. Andrea, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea. Oh, sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, okay, great. Hi, I'm Andrea. I actually didn't set up the Facebook group. That was actually Ian, who's on the site and who we're all really grateful for. But I probably have been badgering people to get their questionnaires in and sign up for the Zoom meeting. So I make no apologies on that. I am, however, a member of the Creditors Committee for the Administrators Kroll. And that's it, really. And also just thanks to everybody for setting up the meeting.
Andrea, thank you. Mr. Ian Nightingale.
Hi, everyone. So obviously from sort of now, it's over a year since the Facebook group was set up. And I set it up originally because my parents were in the same situation as so many people on this call, that they went to their building society, they trusted, and were told there was a scheme going that they were offering, and they entered into this. Now, subsequently found out that people were going on Trustpilot, leaving bad reviews, but it was a one-way traffic. And so I set the group up to give people a voice. And I think it's tremendous that how many people are now members of the group, and that we've got to where we are today. And so it's great that the MPs have put their time in, and then Andy and Mark, you've sort of made this happen for us. So yeah, you obviously hear so many stories throughout the morning. And, you know, I honestly feel one of the things that the building societies are still doing is giving their clients and family of the clients the runaround in the hope that, you know, they'll die or the parents will die and there won't be an issue to answer. So I think, you know, the more pressure we keep up on this particular issue with the building societies, the better it's going to be.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you. We're now going to hear from my colleague Alexandra Zitkus, who has been working so hard in the last week or two on this whole meeting. So Alexandra, please take the moment to briefly introduce yourself and let everybody know roughly how many questionnaires we've had supplied already. Alexandra, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Zitkus. As Andy said, I work with him at Transparency Task Force as the head of events and fundraising, and I'm also a member of the Secretariat. And yes, like Andy said, I've just been helping with the admin of planning this meeting. And I think so far we've received about 140 questionnaires and counting. There'll be more, obviously. I'm currently processing them. So thank you very much for sending them in.
Thanks, Alexandra. And Mark Bishop. Mark.
Hi, my name is Mark Bishop. I volunteer for Transparency Task Force, mostly in the area of strategy and policy. I've run an action group for people who are victims of a different financial services misconduct case, namely Connaught, for the past nearly 11 years. And during that time, I've worked with people who've run many of these kind of action groups to share really information, expertise, and kind of empathy with each other. And that's how I came to be involved in Transparency Task Force. For my sins, I think I've read every one of the questionnaires that's come in yet that's been processed by Alexandra. And so my role mostly will be, as we run through the questions, I'll be trying to steer the debate in the particular directions that may be where we need more information from you, more clarity from you, more testimony, in order to help us to make the case to the FCA, firstly to investigate, and secondly, we hope, to persuade the building societies to compensate those who've lost out.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Okay, we are now going to move swiftly ahead by first of all talking about just some housekeeping notes. So if at some particular point in time you wish to speak, raise your hand digitally. There are too many on the session for me to be able to see everybody at the same time. So it's important that you raise your hand digitally. It's very, very easy to do. All you need to do is look at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you will see a reactions icon. A reactions icon. Click on the reactions icon. You'll then see the various options that you have in front of you now. And of course, you click on raise hand. And that will mean I can tell that you want to come in and say something. And of course, at that point, at the appropriate time, we'll invite you to come and say something. And then afterwards, lower your hand if you can. Please do, unless you are speaking, keep yourself on mute. The mute icon is the microphone icon at the bottom left of your Zoom screen. As David very kindly mentioned earlier, when you do speak, please do mention your name and the relevant building society. Please, please, please be as succinct as possible. It's going to be natural for you all to want to say a great deal. We need to manage the session very effectively from a time point of view. So limit it to a couple of minutes, even better, limit it to just 1 minute if you possibly can. And after you've spoken, please remember to mute yourselves again. Okay, that sets the scene quite nicely, I think. We're going to go through each of the questions. With some of these questions, not all of them, there are particular talking points, as Mark has explained, that we want to kind of delve into. So question number one was, how and when did you come to hear about Phillips Trust Corporation, Family Trust Corporation, the Will Writing Company, or whichever of the associated companies you first had dealings with? Thank you so much for all the testimony that's been provided. It's been very useful to go through that. Mark is now going to elaborate on the importance of this particular question. Then, of course, we're going to invite others to chip in, be they the parliamentarians or attendees. So, Mark, over to you, please, to elaborate on where you feel we ought to really be focusing our attention in relation to this question? Thank you.
Okay, so this question is probably the most important one of the lot, because the defence that has been put forward for the building societies by the FCA is essentially this. Well, the main part of it is when these building societies made introductions, they were all introductions to the will writing company. It was only ever about wills. They could never have anticipated that the will writing company would then introduce the people to the family trust corporation and that trusts would be taken out. Now, I've seen a lot of testimony which says that the introductions from the outset were to the family trust corporation with the intention of creating trusts. And I've also seen some that suggest that they've got proof that the building societies received commission for the writing of trust documents, which proves that they must have known that there were trusts. And indeed, in the introduction, David Simmons, MP, he said that in his family member's case, there was signatures of building society employees witnessing the trust document. So that again would be a way of proving that the building societies knew about the fact that trusts were being taken out. So I would say if you have got any other evidence that would make it seem to a reasonable person that the trust business was known by the building society when they made the introduction, please put your hand up digitally, as Andy's explained how to do, and tell us about it. And remember, when you speak, first give us your name and then the building society. This is not us being pedantic, it's so that the FCA, when they see the video, can then reference it back to the people who've provided the questionnaire responses. So far away.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Mark. We've already got a few hands going up. We're going to go to Karen Coward. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your surname, Karen, and then to Robert Hodgkinson, first of all. So Karen, thank you for putting your camera on. That's great. It's always nice if you can see who's speaking. Lovely to have you with us, Karen. Thank you so much for being here and for willing to say what you're about to say. Thanks, Karen. Please take yourself off mute. Thank you. It's in the look for the microphone at the bottom left of your Zoom screen.
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, I provided a lot of documentation by WeTransfer yesterday that states that this is a Leeds building society, by the way. My parents were definitely introduced to both the will writing company and the family trust corporation by the building society. There's meetings were all held on the building society premises, facilitated by the building society, and the documents that were provided to me by Kroll, actually, because the disclosure that I got via the deed bank, which was where we had to get the documents relating to the trust and the wills, was very sparse. But Kroll actually provided the actual documentation which confirmed that the timeline of events via the building society.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And a specific question, Karen, for you. From what you can recall, when the introduction was originally made, was there any reference to something beyond will writing? In other words, did it seem to you that you were being introduced with the intention of considering some kind of a trust arrangement?
Well, having spoken to my father about this, my involvement of this only arose when I realised that my dad passed me some documents in April last year, which was the administration documents from Kroll. I was aware that my dad had set up a trust, so my dad is fully aware that he set up a trust in the first place. And as far as he was concerned, it was all facilitated by the building society. But say my involvement is only through research and speaking to my father since April last year. I am a solicitor myself, but not in this area, I might add. So my knowledge of trusts and everything has only arisen since April last year.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's already been very, very helpful. We're going to go from Karen to Robert Hodgkinson, then to Bill Storer, then to David A. I'm not sure what David's surname is at the moment, then to Elizabeth, and then to Sean, and then we'll probably move on to the next question, because that's already a really good clutch of evidence. Robert, as succinctly as you can, please respond to what you'd like to say relating to question one about Was there anything to suggest the introduction was more than just about will writing? Thank you, Robert. Please take yourself off mute, sir. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can. Yes, we can.
Good
Thank you.
afternoon, everybody. This is my wife, Maureen. It's about the introduction and whether it was wills or trusts. When we went into the Nottingham Building Society on Bridge Street in 2010, we recently closed with the Britannia Building Society and transferred our funds into the Nottingham. The ladies behind the counter, there was 3 women, would often say, because Maureen would take them buns and things she'd made, and we were quite popular customers for that, that we ought to put our money into a trust. There was no talking about wills. When we were taken into a back room with, it was Towergate Independent Financial Advisors, all the documents that we have. Everything seemed to be run by the Nottingham Building Society. Maureen's father had a previous trust and got an inheritance, so she'd got experience with trust. I had no experience of a trust, but because the Nottingham Building Society was recommending this and did so on several occasions throughout 2010 into 2011, I've got the names of 2 of the ladies that was working there. The galling thing about it all is we know we'd already got a will, so we weren't asking for a will. It was a trust that we were looking for our inheritance for a son. The galling thing is that we've had this digital request through to the Nottingham Building Society. They've sent us many telephone recordings, and all they say is the only money they ever had and the only thing they recommended was for will writing. We know this is not true. We know it was for a trust, and I say it's very, very galling that they aren't actually truthful about the way it was introduced. And if there was any pressure put, it's just the fact that they repeated it each time we visited their offices, the same recommendation. We don't have any documents. We've no flyers. I've traced it back to the first lady from the Family Trust Corporation, Linda Amat, and even spoken to her. We know where she is now, but she's no documents either. We've done our best to try and get, if we could get, something in writing about it, but we don't have that.
Thank you so much. This is already very, very powerful testimony. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask everybody to be as succinct as possible so we get as many people included as we possibly can. Mr. Bill Storer, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'll be succinct as I possibly can. I have just spotted something whilst I was on the call, which I will no doubt help as evidence. But I'm here on behalf of my mother, Christina Jane Storer, and the Building Society is the Newcastle Building Society. My sister and myself have lasting power of attorney on behalf of our mother because of diminished responsibility until relatively recently. Unfortunately, she passed away on the 28th of February. I have a copy of a family protection trust from the Family Trust Corporation Limited, dated the 6th, I think, or 9th of July 2012. I will just confirm if you give me a second. 9th of July 2012. My mother's will, which I also have a copy of, is dated the 6th of July 2012 from the will writing company. We understand, well, we know that my mother went into the Newcastle Building Society shortly before then. We don't know exact dates, but the close proximity of those 2 dates raises alarm bells with me. I then have also spotted that the schedule at the rear of the trust is signed as witnesses by 2 individuals, Mark Russell Sugden and Lee James Cleave, and the addresses given are both for Aston House, Redburn Road, Newcastle upon Tyne. And a quick Google of that address shows it as the will writing company.
Wow.
So I think that's quite powerful, and I'm happy to scan this in, send this in if needed.
Yeah, Bill, could I please request you do that? Please do scan it in and send it in to us. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, this is already rather interesting, isn't it, folks? David, could you please let us know your surname and also the Building Society, then share your thoughts? Thank you.
Yes, it's David Airy, and it's regarding the Leeds Building Society. I believe my parents were introduced to this system both in the branch and a letter by letter, which I do still have, and I included in my my reply to you. And it's openly introducing them to the trust to basically wrap their assets up in trust to protect them against possible care home fees in the future. The Leeds Building Society rep and the will writing rep came round to my parents' house where they were signed up to this scheme, and it was completely about trust funds and nothing about will writing, because they already had their wills in place. At the time, I asked the Building Society rep what they were getting out of this. Were they taking a percentage? Absolutely not. This is a service for our loyal clients, and it's completely free gratis from on terms of on our terms. We get nothing, and it's all about signing you up to the will writing company. So it was completely about the trust fund and protecting those assets.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Wow, this is already proving to be a remarkably valuable session, folks, isn't it? Thank you, David. Let's go to Elizabeth. So reminder, please mention the Building Society, then off you go. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Channels. Again, it's Leeds Building Society.
Apologies for unmuting myself, but it might be worthwhile Elizabeth turning off her camera.
Yes, thank you. Elizabeth, I'm going to, Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'm cutting in because we can't hear you very well. Could you turn your camera off, which might improve the audio? If it doesn't improve the audio much, we'll ask you to write in because we can't really hear you very well. Let's go for it. Thank you. Are we hearing from Elizabeth? Okay. Elizabeth, we're going to skip you and ask you, please.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, we can. Yes, go for it. Carry on. Please do. Yeah. It's proving problematic, Elizabeth. We're going to have to skip. Please write in with what it is you were going to say, okay? Please write in. We're going to go straight to Sean Carroll. Sean, thank you. If you can take yourself off mute, please, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can. So Elizabeth, we're going to skip you because the audio is not too
good. So I'm in the Leeds Building Society with my NHS lump sum pension and my husband's social service lump sum.
Thank you.
Right, okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
No
Thank you very
problem.
much. Please write in explaining what you just said to make sure we've captured it because we couldn't hear all of it. Thank you for your bearing with us. Mr. Sean Carroll, to you, sir. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Carroll. I was introduced to the will writing company, the Family Trust Corporation, through the Leeds Building Society, along with my wife. It came about through an exercise that Leeds Building Society described as life planning, following an annual review of our mortgage arrangement and other activities that we had with them at that time. The estate planning group, surprisingly enough, comprises of the will writing company, the Family Trust Corporation, and something called later life law. I just fail to understand how, by being introduced to that organization, Leeds Building Society did not know who was in it. It just seems unbelievable. I'm still awaiting a reply to my complaint sent to the Leeds Building Society. Apparently that can take anything up to 35 days. I'm a very patient man. I don't mind. Essentially, we wasn't our intention to actually set up a trust. It was to review our wills and set up individual powers of attorney, because my wife, my mother-in-law at that time, had gone into care, and so we were considering our own future needs in terms of our family, our beneficiaries, children, grandchildren. And that's how we got introduced to the estate planning group. It was only with subsequent meetings that we entered into the idea of establishing a trust. It was never our intention to go down that route. The selling techniques, it would be an understatement for me to say that they were unethical. They used any means possible to almost scare us into going into a trust. Payment-wise, we expected the representative of the estate planning group to get paid somehow. In fact, we expected all of the companies involved to get paid somehow. What came as a shock afterwards was that Leeds Building Society also took payment with the introduction and the referral to the estate planning group. That, for me, was never part of the arrangement. I just fail to understand how that building society can now, simply due to the passage of time, go into denial and say they did not place people into a vulnerable position with unregulated companies.
Mr. Carroll, you've made your point so powerfully. Good Lord. Thank you very much. We're going to go straight to Andrea, then to Ian, then to Jenny. Andrea, Ian, Jenny. Andrea, off mute, please. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea Hindley, Nottingham Builder Society, representing my parents. So I've applied for data subject access requests from pretty much everybody that's been named, and I've got it here in writing, which was taken off the Nottingham CRM, and it actually says Mr. and Mrs. L, which is my parents, are coming in to discuss trusts and lasting power of attorney. They have already made a will, but they have not arranged for POA. So I think that's pretty much evidence there. Before they even took out the trust, another entry says, spoke to Mr. and Mrs. L about seeing Bev about doing a trust. And then I've got a letter which says, I can also confirm that we have received a payment of £171.87 for each customer from the will writing company in respect to the product or service that you arrange with them. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. There's a bit of a picture blur developing here, folks, isn't there? Thank you very much indeed, Andrea. Mr. Ian Hitcham, to you, sir.
Yes, hello, my name's Ian Hitcham, and from the Newcastle Building Society, representing my parents who took out the will there. They were actually called up by the Newcastle Building Society to come in and discuss moving some bonds into a trust. There was no mention of wills when they first went in there either. And the first meeting was held in the back room of the Sunderland branch of the Newcastle Building Society. And that was all it was. It was all about a trust because both of their children live abroad. So they wanted to put it in a trust to avoid, probate and things like that. And it was all about money and the trust. There was nothing really about the will at all. And we've pushed quite a lot of pressure onto the Newcastle Building Society to disclose this, ask for disclosure and everything. And we've been stonewalled so far. They have actually admitted that they took payment for it, but they won't tell us how much. They say they're not obliged to tell us how much, but they admitted that they took payment for it, but they refuse to tell us anything further. So basically the whole idea was to come in and talk about some bonds that my parents had, transfer them into a trust. And that was all that was mentioned. That was actually a phone call from the Newcastle to my parents. Please come in and discuss this to make a trust. It wasn't about a will or anything like that. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm wondering, do you have dates, for example, of when these calls were made? Do you have any?
Sure. The first call was made in 2012. And I think like the previous gentleman mentioned about the estate planning, I have a letter from them in 2014 when everything was set up. So it's about 2012, 2013, I believe. My father's since passed, so I'm not exactly 100% certain, but I'm fairly sure it's around about that date. And the estate planning letter, which we have, was from 2014. We also have a letter saying that when the family trust was taken over by Phillips, Newcastle Building Society was aware of this, and it's okay to go with that. They're kind of saying that this is you don't have to go with Phillips, but it's okay if you do, kind of thing, implying that it was also recommended by them. And this was very much recommended by the Newcastle Building Society, my parents. They just totally believed it was part of the building society, really. They were quite old at the time as well, so quite vulnerable to being suggested by a trusted building society, which they've been with for absolute years, by that. So very much kind of playing on that, I believe.
Mr. Hitchin, thank you very much indeed. Again, the narrative is becoming increasingly compelling, isn't it? That's my personal opinion. We're going to hear from Jenny, then from Chris, then to Paul Sowerby, then to Becky Dutton. Jenny, to you. Thank you.
Hi. My mum we lost my dad in 2012. Mum used to go into the building society, Nottingham Building Society, every second week to draw money out. They've never had a bank account. It's always been through the building society. So she used to go and I used to take her in, and just out of the blue one day somebody behind the counter says, have you ever thought about putting your money somewhere safe or whatever? They knew mum had got investments. So because it was the building society, obviously we trusted them and whatever, and it was arranged for us to meet somebody, and it was nothing to do with wills at all, because mum had her own wills previous. So it was basically to look after her finances, basically, and that's when the trust came into it. And I think that was through the will writing company, I think, and then obviously it was the actual people that did the trust was FTC. Family Trust Corporation, that's the one. Other than that, it's a lot like what we've heard already.
Jenny, thank you very much. That was crystal clear. Thank you, Jenny. Mr. Chris Cooper, to you, sir.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly well, sir.
Oh, good. No, we went into the Nottingham branch of the Leeds Building Society because one of their savings account had come up, and while we were there, they was asking about us financial situation, and we just happened to mention that Marion's mum at the time had just moved into care, so they suggested that we should look at this information they had got about setting up a trust to try and prevent the care home fees being taken from our own property, which of course, seeing what was happening with our mother-in-law's property, we were interested in. But all the meetings that took place was in the Nottingham Building Society offices, which they helped to set up with representatives from the trust and the family and the will writing people. But it was definitely on the basis of setting up the trust for that reason.
Again, very, very clear. Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, thank you so much for being here and sharing your testimony in this way. That was very clear. Mr. Paul Sowerby, to you, sir.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, Paul. Can you turn your camera on?
Camera.
Look for the camera icon at the bottom left. If you can, that
it's got a red line through it. I'm trying to press the start video. That's all I've got on there. So
okay, just carry on, Paul. Thank you.
So basically, it's for Newcastle Building Society. I'm here on behalf of my late father-in-law and my mother-in-law. I've got a letter dated the 23rd of January 2019, which basically says that they're writing to my mother and father-in-law in connection with their former estate planning partner, the will writing company. So to me, that shows a direct affiliation between Newcastle Building Society and the link with the will writing company, which in the minds of my mother and father-in-law meant that it was sort of a regulated firm. It had been recommended by Newcastle Building Society, so they were basically passed over the will writing company, and that's where the mess began. It was passed on several times after that, I think, to another company, then through the Phillips Trust. But the letter they've got clearly states that it will be taken over by another company. That other company will introduce fee charges for the trust. And so basically Newcastle Building Society were very well aware that it was a trust that my mother-in-law, father-in-law had. They were informing them that the new company who's taken over after the will writing company collapsed will be putting in future charges for the administration of the trust. But the very interesting point on page 2, and this is a letter that I've passed in, is whilst there's no risk to your property and other assets held within the trust, we understand that they both could be a cause of distress and concern for our customers and then switch over. But just reading that to me means that Newcastle Building Society have made a recommendation through the will writing company, which it would be fair to say for vulnerable preyed-on pensioners, they were trust. And they've actually stipulated in there that there's no risk to the property or the assets within the trust. But clearly, from the mess that we've seen over the past year or so, that's not the case.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We couldn't see you, but we could certainly hear you, and that was loud and clear. Paul, thank you. The name on the screen is Becky Dutton, but I'm suspicious it might not be Becky Dutton. Sir, to you.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Matthew Williams. Becky Dutton is my sister who's here with me. I'm with my parents, Peter and Sandra Williams. Obviously, a big thank you to everybody who's contributing and those that have set up. And our story is the same. To try and put a different light on it, like my parents have been with Nottingham Building Society since 1964, so they're an organisation that they really trusted and had, you know, been members of that organisation coming up for 50 years. Back in February 2016, my parents went in to make a deposit. That's all they did, what they regularly do. And by the Nottingham Building Society, as part of their life planning, they asked if they wanted a will or a funeral plan. My father completely rejected the funeral plan, but they said they were interested in a will. On the premises, they would then, by Nottingham Building Society, introduced to the FTC, the Family Trust. In these meetings with the Family Trust, there was a financial advisor present from the Nottingham Building Society by the name of Steve Hudson. And he was there in 2016. He was also there in 2019 when it changed from the Phillips Trust to Phillips Legal Solutions. And he was part of Nottingham Building Society. And these meetings always happened in the Hucknall branch of Nottingham Building Society. And so it was kind of implicit that it was a partnership. And they were advised, bearing in mind they went in for a will, they wanted information on, they were advised to put the house in trust, and they were also advised to put their money in a bond. They put money in a prudential bond, and then in forgive me if this is not 100% correct, 2019, they were encouraged again on the premises to change the bond from the prudential to PLS, to Phillips Legal Solutions. They also were never made aware of the fact that the house and the deeds would then be taken out of their name. They also were under the impression that they could draw on this money whenever they want. And it's only that subsequently, over the past 2 years, that this has all come to light. And they were never made aware that they needed to make changes to their house insurance. So for the past so many years, they've been paying house insurance, and it's null and void because the name is not, the house is not in their name. So that is basically it in a nutshell. But I remember when they did this, and I'm a very skeptical person, and the reason I live overseas and the reason I signed it and things like this, I have to be honest, is implicitly because it was Nottingham Building Society. It wasn't someone off a flyer or a cold call. It was Nottingham Building Society, and they know the cashiers, they know the people, they, you know, it's what you expect from a building society. And for Nottingham Building Society, which they seem to be doing, to imply that they, you know, haven't encouraged this or anything is completely false. They were part of this. I don't know what they were getting out of it. It came under the banner of their life planning. And it's, you know, we received a letter on the 18th of December 2019, which again I can scan and send to you, which basically is on Nottingham Building Society headed paper, and it's from a lady called Tina Hayton Banks, who is Director of Member Services for Nottingham Building Society, advising about the fact that the family trust is being taken over by the Phillips Legal Solutions. So that shows you that they are involved, and they have been involved with this every step of the way. It's not, it wasn't an introduction, it was more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We're getting so much rich, detailed, evidenceable, if that's the right word, excuse my grammar, it's not, information here. It's absolutely priceless, folks. It really is. Everyone's doing so well. Thank you. We need to manage time really closely. We're going to go to Sue, then to Shirley, then to other Sue, then to Lychee. Forgive me if I've mispronounced that. But as succinctly as possible, folks. The good news is a lot of what's been said so far hasn't just been about question one. It's kind of taken us into other areas as well. So in theory, we should be able to save and catch up a bit of time later on, because some of those points, those subsequent points, have already been covered. But as succinctly as you can, folks. So Sue Smedley next. Thank you, Sue.
Hello, I'm Sue Smedley, and I'm here representing my mother-in-law, Mrs. Glenys Smedley, who had an introduction through the Nottingham Building Society. And we have a letter probably similar to the one the guy before me was saying on the 18th of December in 2019. And I just want to add that that letter actually from the Nottingham Building Society states that they said it was important that we help our members to save, plan and protect for the future. And for a number of years, we provided estate planning services to our members through a partnership with the will writing company. Those services included the setting up and administration of family trusts, and we referred you to the will writing company for estate planning advice, and you subsequently set up a family trust. That's an admission. Okay.
Please don't lose that letter. Thank you very much indeed, Sue. We go from Sue to Shirley. That was very succinct, Sue. Shirley, how succinct can you be? No pressure. Over to you. Shirley, are you with us? I think you might have just dropped. I think so. Let's go to the other Sue. Which other Sue are you, other Sue? What's your surname?
It's Sue Thurkill.
Thank you very much, Dave Sue Thurkill. What would you like to share with us? Thank you.
Well, myself and my husband went into the Leeds Building site in Headingley in Leeds, just to deposit some money, or can't really remember that. And they asked us about wills, which we'd not done. So we said we would be interested in it. And then they made an appointment for us to go back to see, I think it was Gary Burns, that's what I've got documents here for. And then they started discussing the trust. So we did take out a trust, wills, powers of attorney, and a funeral plan. And we were under the impression that it was through the Building Society because we've been going to them for years, so we just thought, trusted them. And then in 2019, somebody contacted us to say that the family trust had gone, basically, and the Phillips Trust was taken over. Somebody came to our house to discuss the Phillips Trust, and then we had to pay some more money to have it transferred into there. My husband passed away suddenly in 2020, and I tried to get the funeral plan sorted out, and I couldn't find the documents. So I went into the Leeds Building Society and explained, and they said they'd got nothing to do with it. They didn't have anything to do with any of the things that were taken out. So I did find policy, because I had rung the funeral planners, and they said they couldn't find any evidence of the plan we'd taken out, but I did find the documents, got back in touch, and then they said that I was there. But I did try with the building society several times to get information about this. When my husband died, I tried to get in touch with the Phillips Trust for months and months. I was on the phone, never answered. The email that I sent was sent back that they would be in touch within so many days, which never happened. I did eventually speak to them, probably 10 months later. Spoke to a girl and she said everything was fine, not to worry. That was in 2021. And since then, all this has happened, which I found out by a coincidence, that Kroll had taken over. So I've been in a bit of a quandary, and I still really don't know what's going on.
So can I please thank you for stepping forward and sharing what's happened? And I'm going to say something that I'm going to say this to Sue, but it applies to everybody. If anybody's feeling particularly down or despairing of the situation, please pop me an email. You've all got my email address. Please pop me an email. We understand, we really do understand the emotional trauma that this kind of situation can create. We are really tuned into that. I won't depress everybody by saying why we are really tuned into that, but we really, really are. So genuinely, if anybody's feeling alone or isolated or anxious or worried or particularly sad, then please let us know. Let us know. You must do that. Let us know. Sue Thurkill, thank you very much for stepping forward as you've done today. That was crystal clear. We're going to go to Laishi, then we're going to go to Jennifer Howard, and then we're going to be moving on to the next question. Sean, I can see your hands up. We'll come back to you later on, okay? But we'll skip you this time round as you spoke earlier. Thank you for your understanding, sir. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your first name. It's a lovely first name, Laishi.
Okay, I apologise first of all because I haven't prepared for this meeting because I wasn't aware that it was happening until a couple of days ago. Hence my name, Lychee Lady. It's just a friend Zoom. So my real name is Christine Male, M-A-L-E, and I'm basically kind of on this Zoom on behalf of my mum and dad. My dad passed away in 2020, but before then he was very astute with business and he was always back and forth to the Building Society. So in 2006, and I'll make this as quick as I can because I haven't filled any of your questionnaires in, but I will. So in 2016, my dad went to the Saffron and Walden Building Society in Ware. He went there for advice on estate planning and how he could possibly avoid care home fees. So he trusted them implicitly in the advice that he was given. He was put in touch with a representative from the will writing company, who he was told worked for the Saffron and Walden. His name was Mike Murphy, who actually was a really kind gentleman and has helped me out subsequently. So I don't want to put any blame on him. It's certainly the Building Society. So my dad had an existing will, which, having spoken to this representative, Mike Murphy, from the will writer company, they had the will rewritten And also a trust fund was set up to put the house in, so it was dry trust. And also he had POA set up so that myself as an only child could have POA over them. Then in 2019, I got a phone call, and it was from a gentleman called Peter Everett from the Phillips Trust Corporation. And he came to the home, and he came to my mum and dad's home to discuss the trust. I really dislike this man. He tried to coerce me into disclosing any other monies that my parents had, and he wanted me to invest them in a bond with the Phillips Trust. So I've refused flatly to tell him how much money there was, and that I was not interested in that, and that I was purely here to try and represent my dad, who at the time was still alive but had dementia. So I asked him, you know, is there any more information you can give me about the trust? He said, no, it's absolutely fine. But what we do need to do is to set aside, appoint new trustees. So I suppose I should have really asked why that was. He just said that the other ones had basically stepped down. So he said, it's very simple. We can appoint trustees from the Phillips Trust. So naively and stupidly, I went along and I agreed. We paid around £600 and we had them put down as the trustees. So I did then go into the Building Society, and I said to them that I was just a little bit concerned that I'd gone through my dad's paperwork, and I could see that there was some correspondence from the will writing company, and that it had become the FTC. So I said, I'm a bit concerned, is there anything I should be worried about? And they told me there was absolutely nothing to worry about. It was just literally change of name, moving over, and that I would be contacted by a company called the Phillips Trust, and they would then pick up and discuss any issues that I had with trusts, or if I wanted to change anything. And that's when this guy, Peter Everett, came to see me. So beyond that, my dad passed away, and I was going through his paperwork, and I couldn't find an awful lot about the Phillips Trust. So I thought, you know, I'll phone them. So I phoned them, and I couldn't get through. I phoned numerous times, never did get through. I wrote to them, never heard from them. So then I happened to open the Daily Mail, and I saw the double page spread that everyone else probably saw. I physically felt sick. I thought, oh my God, my parents' house is in this trust. They are one of the 144 or whatever it was. So I then went to a solicitor that I trusted and knew, and they dealt with family law, financial planning and stuff like that. And to date, I've spent about £7,000 with them. We have got a solution, which I'm very grateful for, but you know, it's caused so much angst. And my mother doesn't even know about this because I can't share it with her, because it just, you know, affect her so badly. So I am dealing with it myself. But luckily, as I say, I've paid the solicitors, and we are getting the Phillips Trust removed as trustees. So I'm probably in maybe a much better position than some of the people here. But I just wanted to let you know that's my story, and I do totally blame the building societies.
Christine, thank you very much indeed. This is, again, very, very powerful stuff. And hearing the path you went down, I'm sure it's going to be very useful to others, knowing that it's possible. It can be possible to get this all unraveled. There is hope, is the message I take from your very kind and thoughtful comments, Christine. Thank you. We're going to go to Jennifer, then we're going to I'm going to go back to Mark Bishop just to add any sort of thoughts that have come to Mark's mind from listening to the commentary so far. Then we're going to jump ahead to question number 2. But first, to Jennifer. Lovely to see you with us, Jennifer. Please share your thoughts once you've taken yourself off mute. Thank you.
Sorry about that. It's Jennifer Howard, Newcastle Building Society. It's just a quick, like everyone else, we visited the Newcastle Building Society in October 2013 to open an instant access account. And I can only describe it as we were pounced on by the manager, saying, oh, would you like to have a financial planning meeting and an estate planning meeting? We demurred, but she persuaded us to have it. And an appointment was made in the back room of the Newcastle branch. And we met somebody from the will writing company who described the services, and we needed, well, will updating because we'd had it for quite a few years and we had grandchildren since then. And then she gave her an estate planning book to read. And in there, that was where it was introduced about having trustees to take care of our money in our house and that after we died, without the family having to be involved with it. And it, like everyone else, it went on from there. We eventually signed up with the Family Trust Corporation. We did ask her what would happen if the companies went bust. She said, oh, that won't happen. Everything will be all right. We'll be covered, which I thought was an important point to raise. And that was all I needed to raise on that.
And we're very glad that you have done, Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and Howard too. Okay, I'm going to share my screen to show you the next question, but as I said, we're going to jump back to Mark Bishop for his reflections on what's been covered so far, any particular thoughts that come to his mind. I'm going to share my screen to show the next question, just so you can be thinking about that whilst we're doing this. So question number 2 is, what information or impression were you given? What information or impression were you given about the relationship between your building society and the firm you first had dealings with? Of course, a lot of this has already come out, so we're only looking for fresh, new information that hasn't already been covered. But before we tackle question number 2, let's go back to Mark Bishop. Mark, any thoughts that come to mind from what's been heard so far? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make 2 points, which are just really for the recording so the FCA gets it. The first is, it feels to me very much as though the staff were probably trained to handle this. So, for example, if somebody goes into the building society and they meet a certain age profile or other characteristic, they're asked, have you thought about estate planning? And they're likely to have been given a script as to how to handle that kind of thing and other training materials. Similarly, the IFAs. Those materials are supposed to be retained by authorised firms, and the FCA should be able to inspect them. So if it was necessary to have an investigation, the FCA could probably find evidence that they were in fact trained to do this, and it therefore kind of came from the top. It wasn't just a rogue individual here or there, because the pattern of behaviour seems very similar. The other thing is, I can't remember which, was it Paul Sowerby, but one of the respondents made what I thought was a genius point, which is every person who's received a letter from the Building Society that talks about the collapse of the Family Trust Corporation, it's self-evident that the Building Society knew that they had a trust. Now, no way could a firm that provides a trust share that information with the Building Society in the normal course of business. It'd be confidential. So there must have been some other reason. There must have been some kind of agreement between the two about the sharing of data, and perhaps the introductory agreement under which they receive commission. So that's something else that the FCA should be looking at. But certainly my view would be anybody who's received that letter, or indeed other correspondence in which the FCA, sorry, in which the Building Society has admitted or conceded that there's going to be a trust set up or discussed, it's pretty much bang to rights. Just now to move on to this next question, question 2, we're going to have to spend less time on each question, quite dramatically so, or else we'll be here literally all day and all night. So we'll do this one quickly. And this one is about what information or impression were you given about the relationship between your building society and the firm you first had dealings with? And so what we're really looking for here is anything that could reasonably be interpreted as endorsement. Now, the FCA has a set of rules for its authorised firms and people, and it says that an execution-only transaction, which is what they've told us that these were, is a transaction executed by a firm upon specific instructions of a client, where the firm does not give advice relating to the merits of the transaction and in relation to which the rules on assessment of appropriateness do not apply. So what they basically are saying there is, for the story put forward by the Building Society and FCA to be true, you would have to have gone into the Building Society and said, I'm thinking of getting a trust. Are there any firms you know that do trusts? And they would have said, there are lots of firms that do trusts. Here is a list of some. We don't know anything about these firms. We're not endorsing them in any way, nor are we endorsing the idea of there being a trust. Yeah, that would be an execution-only arrangement. An endorsed arrangement would be that they say they may introduce the idea of having a trust to you, or they may say, have you thought about estate planning? One component of which might be trusts. We have a firm that we recommend that provides these sorts of services, and it's this firm. Would you like us to arrange an introduction? Equally, an endorsement could be any co-branded marketing materials, any posters put up in their offices, any leaflets given out by their staff, not just a name and address, but a leaflet, any meetings happening on premises, any involvement of the employees in the trust formation, any of those kinds of things. Now, we've heard a lot of that stuff already. We don't want to hear more of the same, but if anybody has got anything else that is a form of endorsement that we haven't heard about yet, please put your hand up and we'd love to hear about it. Remember your name and the building society.
Thank you, Mark. And you've really done a superb job there, I think, in sort of focusing attention where the FCA should be giving real thought after each of these questions that we're discussing. If you can carry on doing that, Mark, in your typically brilliant way, that would be wonderful, 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 wonderful. We're going to go to Andrea, then to Dave Turner, then to Claire. Andrea, thank you. Andrea, can you take yourself off mute? I've got a feeling Andrea might have, accidentally just ejected herself from the meeting. I think she has. So I'm sure she'll be back very soon. So we'll reconnect with Andrea in a moment. But first of all, we're going to go to Dave Turner, then we'll go back to Andrea, who's already just coming back through. Mr. Turner.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm representing my parents. They banked all their adult life with the Newcastle Building Society and Hartlepool. They got introduced to the will writing company from a visit to the building society, and met about estate planning in the back room, and a visit was set up and a representative came to their home, and that's when they set up the trust and paid £4,000. But I have a similar letter, I think quite a few people must have it, from the Newcastle Building Society. It's dated the 30th of January 2019. Addressed to my father. It says, we're writing to you in connection with products you arranged by our former estate planning partner, the Will Writing Company Limited. And there's various, it's a 2-page letter, and some of it's already been read out. My parents didn't put the home into it. They set up a trust. They've transferred all their life savings, which are in prudential bonds, literally the life savings, which they drew down originally through the Building Society, and then that was happening through what then came the family trust. And it was only when the money stopped coming in on a monthly basis that we realised, and I got involved, and we found out what had gone on. But in this particular letter, it says, I have a family trust. What does this mean for me? It says, your trust is still valid and is administered by the Family Trust Corporation, FTC, which is now being purchased by Phillips Legal Solutions. So I think this is a common letter I think people have got. But it's pretty clear that the introduction, there was the estate planning partner, the Will Writing Company, and that's where all of this has all started from. Building societies been introducing their trusted clients to a lot of rogues.
I think your summary of the situation is, I personally think, is absolutely spot on, sir. Thank you very much indeed. I turned your camera off, by the way, because it was a bit glitchy. That was me that turned it off, okay? And we're going to go back to Andrea, who's going to take herself off mute, but stay with us this time. Andrea.
Sorry, Andrea, Nottingham Building Society. So I've got the brochure from 2014, which I requested from the Nottingham Building Society. It's actually on writing a will, but I've asked for the one on trust, and they actually didn't have one, but it does talk about estate planning as well. So in that brochure, it actually says things like our will writing service. We've teamed up with the will writing company. We chose to work with the will writing company. Ready to tackle your will, arrange an appointment by coming into the branch today. So, there's lots of terminology in there, which suggests that when they're selling these products, they're kind of passing them off as being theirs. But when it all goes wrong, they're only an introducer. So I've got that, and I've forwarded that already, but it's 11 pages long, and there's only one tiny little bit at the bottom in very, very small print where it says the Nottingham Building Society is an introducer to the will writing company, and it actually comes under mortgage advice, but nowhere else in the leaflet does it say we're only an introducer. So that's that. Thank you.
Andrea, you are single-handedly a treasure chest of insight and evidence. It's absolutely first-class stuff. It really, really is. Thank you so much. We're going to hear from Claire.
Yeah, so I've spoken to a couple of clients going back to the original introductions, and it seems that Newcastle Building Society put on a couple of seminars jointly with the Family Trust Corporation and the Will Writing Company. So clients received invitations through the post to come along to a seminar where there was food put on and drinks, and they were introduced to these companies, and that's how some clients first came to be introduced to these companies, and then later had appointments at home where they then took these documents further.
Thank you, Claire. That's beautifully succinct. Thank you. I turned your camera off because it got a bit glitchy. We're going to go straight to Gordon Crosthwaite. Sir, please introduce yourself, which building society, and let us know what you want to say. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's Newcastle Building Society. I have a letter from Newcastle Building Society dated 27 April 2015. And within that letter, it's a financial planning letter. It specifically states, to help meet your objectives, I recommend that you invest in a prudential investment plan. This plan will be assigned to your existing family trust via the estate planning group. And that existing trust was with the Family Trust Corporation. And subsequent to that, I have the agreement from Newcastle Building Society, which at the back you can see refers to the Prudential Trust and the Family Trust Corporation.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. Thank you very much. We're going to hear from Victoria, then Amanda, then David Airy. Then we're going to skip on to the next question where Mark's, but before that, Mark's going to give a kind of recap on what we've covered off on this question. And Mark, let's make sure we don't forget what the gentleman mentioned earlier about the house contents insurance and buildings insurance. That was a really interesting point. It might seem like a small bit of detail, but it could be very significant if in actual fact, the trust arrangement means that the insurance policies in place could have been voided. Victoria, please share your thoughts. Thank you.
Hello, my husband, Norman. We came via the route that Claire has just described, letter through the post. When we got to the seminar, everything was covered: wills, trusts, enduring powers of attorney. And there were members of Newcastle Building Society who we dealt with in the office at the seminar because we talked to them.
Thank you very much. That really could not have been any clearer or more convincing. Thank you very much, Victoria. Amanda, then we're going to David, then we're going to jump back to Mark Bishop. Amanda, thank you. Which building society?
Sorry, just unmuting. Nottingham Building Society, representing both my parents, Mr. Grenville Astell and Mrs. Margaret Astell. They went into the Building Society having paid off a mortgage and said, we paid off the mortgage, how do we keep it safe? And were told by Nottingham Building Society, you need estate planning. Now you own it. You need to take out a trust to make sure that people can't grab the money, and we'll put you in contact with the will writing company. The will writing company did their wills, did powers of attorney, and the trust was set up with Family Trust. Now, Family Trust phoned my mum and dad when they decided that they were going to go into administration. Now, my mum and dad were now 87 and 88. And so I dealt with the phone call, and the man that spoke to me said he was from Family Trust himself and that he was retiring. And therefore, because of that, my mum and dad needed to move their trust to Phillips Trust. I said, why would they? They've paid £5,000 already for what you've already done. Why would they move again? And he said, because we are retiring, you have no option. You need to go with Phillips Trust. I refused and then spent the last 5 years trying to sort it.
Wow, well, that's remarkable. That's remarkable, Amanda. Thank you so much for telling us that.
I've got thousands of emails, but I engaged a lawyer, and she's got all the documentation, all the physical documentation from the trust, etc., etc. So I would be able to access information, written information, but not at the minute.
That's absolutely superb, Amanda. Please do kind of ready yourself to do that at some point in time. That's brilliant to know. Thank you, Amanda. Mr. David Airy, we're back to you, sir.
Okay, I'd just like to read you a short paragraph from a letter from Leeds Building Society. It says, in association with the will writing company, we have put together a range of legal and financial planning options to help you protect and make the most of your assets. For further information and a no obligation estate planning review appointment, call our financial specialist, planning manager, or call into any branch and to arrange it.
Thank you, David. I can understand why you've very kindly taken time to read that out. Thank you. We're going to go back to Mark Bishop for his kind of reflections on what's been thought about so far. Mark, what in particular do you think the FCA should be thinking about in relation to what we've just been hearing? Thank you, Mark.
I think they should look at their own rule book and consider what an execution-only introduction is. It certainly isn't, suggesting people should consider a course of action they hadn't previously thought of, proactively marketing a product to them, inviting them to events, allowing another business to conduct activity on their premises and with the assistance of their staff. There isn't much more I can imagine than has happened that could constitute endorsement. And I have to say, if I were the FCA, I would be ashamed of myself right now to have claimed that these were execution-only transactions. They weren't, and it's taken us a relatively short period of time to find out precisely that they weren't. Now, I'm going to just ask now whether the MPs on the call have got any questions or comments they'd like to ask before we move on to the next question, because I'm keen that they should have an opportunity to kind of ask any questions and so on as well.
Thank you, Mark. I'm not sure which parliamentarians are still with us at this point in time. Please do unmute if you want to come in. Bob or Peter or David.
No, Peter's still on the call.
I'm back here, Andy.
Thank you. Peter, anything you'd like to come in on at this point?
A couple of points. First of all, can I thank everybody who's joined in today? There's probably a lot more very definite and very provable evidence than I thought we were going to get. I thought we were going to get a lot of people who would tell us what had happened but couldn't remember the details. So thank you to everybody who's kept all the emails and letters, who knows exactly who you spoke to and where you spoke to them, because it's the kind of thing that if 2 or 3 people say that, it doesn't prove very much. If 60 people say exactly the same thing on different days in different building societies, then it creates a pattern that the Financial Conduct Authority and individual building societies can't be allowed to ignore. Can also echo Andy's comments that we see a lot of this. Me and Andy have had too many meetings like this with people who have trusted folk that appear to be trustworthy have been let down and have faced the possibility of sometimes losing their entire life savings. And aside from the financial impact that has, the emotional and psychological impact that it can have on anybody is impossible to measure. We've seen it, so don't feel as if it's only you that's going through that. Don't feel as if any of this has been your fault. And as Andy has said, if any time you feel as if you're running up against a brick wall and you're just not going to get anywhere, speak to Andy, there's any number of other people you can speak to. Do not let this get you further down than it has to. I don't know if it's going to be possible to get everybody's money back or get anybody's money back, but I'm certainly not going to let it go. I know I'm gathering that there's a sort of geographical concentration of this in particular parts of, it seems to be primarily the East Midlands and the North East of England. If you haven't already contacted your MP, do that. Because I got a chance to raise a question about this in the House of Commons this morning. It was why I was a bit late joining the original pre-meeting. There's a lot of your local MPs who will take this up for you, and if you get 15 or 20 MPs constantly asking questions about it, then eventually government ministers do start to listen. And they might not always do what we want. They certainly don't often do it as quickly as we would like, but there have been changes made to company legislation over the last year that I don't think would have happened had it not been, first of all, for organisations such as the Transparency Task Force, and secondly, for large numbers of MPs that just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and saying, we're not going to let this keep happening to our constituents. I'm not surprised but bitterly disappointed that the Phillips Trust Corporation joins the list, as well as the various other associated companies. I hope that at some point, when we get promises from ministers that they won't let it happen again, that they won't let it happen again. My sinking feeling is that right now it's already happening somewhere else. And you'll know that I said that when I had debates on Blackwell Bond, I said it when we had debates on safe hands, I said it when the economic crime bill was going through Parliament, and if I get a chance to debate this in more detail, I'll need to say it again. We've seen what's happened with Phillips Trust Corporation, and exactly the same thing is probably happening just now under a different guise. We need your support, we need you to provide evidence so that we can make regulators and whoever the minister is at the time understand. First of all, this is not a problem that's going to go away by itself. It's almost certainly getting worse. And the damage it causes, aside from the financial impact on people, the damage it does to families, the damage it does to people's well-being, their mental well-being in particular, is a huge, huge issue that I'm not convinced that the government or indeed the regulators are taking seriously enough.
Peter, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank goodness there are parliamentarians like yourself who really are willing and able to stand up for constituents in the way that you do. Thanks, Peter. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm going to share my screen, show question 3, which is a particularly interesting one. We'll limit it to probably three participants per question, unless there's a really good reason to do otherwise. So here it is, question 3. The question is, was the existence of any commission-based payment received by the Building Society brought to your attention? If so, when and why? Mark will comment in a moment why this is such an important point. And if we can please invite anybody that does speak to just focus on this particular point, so we can try to manage our time together today as effectively as possible. So I'll repeat the question. Was the existence of any commission-based payment received by the Building Society brought your attention, and if so, when and why? Mark, to you first. Thank you.
So just to say on this one, we're not interested in commissions in relation to the wills. We're only interested in commissions relating to the Family Trust Corporation setting up a trust. And we're interested if the answer is yes or no. Both of those things are relevant. If the answer is yes, then obviously that means that they know that there's a trust. If the answer is no, but if they knew that there was a trust anyway, then that also is interesting. They chose not to disclose it to you. And as Andy said, I think we're going to say very quick answers, kind of try for 30 seconds if you can, and maybe the first 3 people to put their hands up. Off we go.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. We're going to go to Gillian. Gillian, please remember to let us know which Building Society, then share your thoughts, if you can, within 30 seconds. There's a challenge for you, Gillian. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Gillian Daybell, and I was introduced to by the Nottingham Building Society. I have to say that the existence of commission-based payments was certainly never mentioned at any meeting. And it wasn't until I asked for a DSAR from the Nottingham Building Society, and also in the accompanying letter, I asked for anything else, absolutely everything that they'd got on my situation. And in that letter, they declared that they had received £212 for introducing me. And I'm sorry about this, it was to the will writing company. But that was the situation. And I didn't find out about this until the 7th of June, 2022. That's mine.
Gillian, thank you for sharing yours. Thank you. We're going to go very quickly. Let's challenge everyone to be within 30 seconds. That way we can include Karen and Andrea and Gordon and Bill. No more after Bill, please, on this particular question. And Mark, at the end, tell everybody what a DSAR is, if you don't mind. Karen, to you. Thank you. Go for it, Karen.
Hello, yeah. My parents did approach the Building Society for the purpose of setting up a will, and that's the trust evolved through that. So when I did the data subject access request to Leeds Building Society, they actually disclosed that they'd received 10% commission. I've provided that evidence to you already, Mark's already confirmed that you have this. But my parents, there's not a split on whether it's in relation to the will or in relation to the trust or everything. I imagine it was everything as a package.
Karen, that's beautifully succinct. Andrea, within 30 seconds, go for it.
Yeah, Andrew Hindley, Nottingham. So I've got it in writing from the Nottingham that they received £171.87 for each of my parents, so a total of £343.74. On top of that, they received, the independent financial advisor received 3% of the overall amount invested, and then the Nottingham received 25% of his fee, making a further £305 for each of my parents. So in total, Nottingham have had £953.74 in fees, confirmed in writing by the Nottingham.
Andrea, treasure chest stuff. Thank you so much, Andrea. Mr. Gordon Crosthwaite, to you.
Hi again. I refer to my previous, although my mother-in-law and I were told that the Building Society received no money from the Family Trust Corporation, this fee agreement that my mother-in-law signed, it wasn't signed at the back in our presence, but after that you can see there's a commission fee there and there's a commission fee there, and it's to the Family Trust Corporation. And the DSAR is a data subject access report.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. Thank you. And I think Mark might want to talk about that just very briefly so everybody understands the power of data subject access requests. And we'll probably come back to that when we talk about next steps. Letters to MPs, data subject access requests, etc. We'll be covering that all at the end. Thank you, Gordon. Mr. Bill Story, back to you. Less than 24 seconds. Go for it.
There's a challenge. I'll be quick. Our mother was introduced in the Newcastle Building Society in, we believe, June 2012. And she was not told there was any commission-based payment from the Building Society when she was introduced to the will writing company. And I think from my previous evidence, I've clearly established there's a link between the will writing company and the Family Protection Trust.
Thank you. Perfectly succinct. We're going to go to Mark Bishop. Mark, tell everybody a little bit more about a data subject access request, how and why they can be so powerful, and then reflections on what we've been talking about just now. And I'll get the next question up on the screen as well. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, to save time, I've put a description of DSAR in the chat, so you can read that at your leisure. Comments that have been made been very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Shall we move on to question 4?
I think we shall. So let me share my screen. Share screen. There we go. Gradually getting my head around this slideshow. So the next question, number 4, is how did your trust come to be transferred from the Family Trust Corporation to the Phillips Trust Corporation? Mark, why is this important?
For the reason spotted by Paul Sowerby. If you have any kind of correspondence from the Building Society that talks about the fact that you've got a trust, and it happens that the people that organised it have gone under or something like that, then it's very significant because it means they know you've got a trust. So they were involved in setting that up because it's confidential personal information. The other thing that's interesting is I'd like to know whether the wording of any such letter or email or other correspondence says that the Family Trust Corporation has gone or is going into administration, because it hasn't gone into administration, not even now, all these years after the event, has that firm gone into administration. It's just about the only firm involved in this business that hasn't, but it hasn't gone into administration. So if they told you that it has, then that is also a very serious issue because it hadn't, and they could easily have checked at Companies House. So we don't want you to talk about, we don't want any evidence at this point about people phoning you up to say that the Family Trust Corporation has gone under or anything like that. If there are people from the Family Trust Corporation or Phillips Trust Corporation, we don't want to know about that. We only want to know about written evidence you have of the of the Building Society notifying you about a problem with the Family Trust Corporation and the proposed handover. So maybe have only 3-4 people, very quick, 30 seconds, if you can possibly manage it.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. We're going to hear first from Alan Gelsthorpe and then from Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, and then we'll limit it to just those two, and then we'll move on. Mr. Gelsthorpe, please tell us which Building Society first of all. Thank you.
Yeah, me and my wife was introduced to Family Trust Corporation in 2012 by the Nottingham Building Society Mansfield branch. The question you were asking now, I've got a letter from Taylor Rose here stating that they have taken over all the clients of the will writing company, and they will be moving us to Phillips Trust Corporation, and that will be sending a lady to see us. This was in July 2018. We joined the other trust, in the family trust, in May 2012.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. That's very, very helpful to know. Thank you, Mr. Gilsthorpe. Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, back to you. The Cooper two.
Oh, hi there. When we were notified about the first company, that they were they were finished and it had to go to the Phillips Trust, we received a letter from the previous company stating that. And then a gentleman called Joseph Etherington came to see us from the Phillips Trust, and we had this long conversation with him, and basically he was quite forceful, and saying that we hadn't got any other option other than transferring it to the Phillips Trust. So obviously we went along with it, but in between times, we found out that the two companies were actually related, and we did ask that question to the first company, because when I rang their office, the address was the same as the Phillips Trust Corporation. So I said, well, how come you're in the same building? And they said that because of the transfer, that there were people from the first company in that building helping the transition to the Phillips Trust.
Thank you very much indeed. You've actually not only just responded to the current question, but also the next one, which you'll hear in a moment, Mrs. Cooper. Thank you very much. No, not at all. I'm thanking you for it. I'm thanking you. You're ahead of the game here. Very, very quickly from Mr. Hitchin, then we'll move on. Very quickly, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, it's again about the Newcastle Building Society. I've got a letter from them dated on telling me that the family trust has gone under, and that we can transfer across to the Phillips Trust, and that's on their headed note paper. Dated, actually, I can't see the date on it. I've got a copy of it, but it's definitely on their headed note paper from the Newcastle Building Society financial advisors, telling us about the will writing company and then the family trusting company, and then moving on to Phillips after that. It details 3 of them, and it says important information about your family trust in massive big letters across the top. So they obviously knew about the trust.
Yeah. It would seem so, wouldn't it, sir?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just 10 or 15 seconds from Mr. Carroll before we do move on. Thank you, Sean.
Hi. Very quickly, we basically received nothing from the Leeds Building Society saying that FTC were in trouble and basically going to retire, and our trust would be effectively in limbo, I guess. Our information came from within the group of companies themselves, including Deed Bank. Quite why it came from Deed Bank, I can only surmise it was because of the people who were actually connected across all of the companies that we seem to be talking about. But we actually received nothing from the Leeds Building Society to say that there was anything amiss.
Remarkable. Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to share my screen once again to show us the next question. And while we're doing that, Mark's going to reflect on what we've discussed so far on the last question and explain why question 5, which is, at the time of the transfer, were you aware that the 2 companies were connected? If not, when and how did you become aware of the link? Mark.
Thanks, Andy. I think that the answers to the last question speak for themselves. As to this one, we're not so much interested in whether you were aware that they were connected. What we're interested in is evidence about the depth of the connection. So I'll give you an example. One person submitted a DSAR and they found that that actually the customer records that are kept on computer at the Family Trust Corporation were then handed over to the Philips Trust Corporation. It was the same customer database being operated by the same people. So that would be pretty compelling, an example of evidence that really they're the same companies. We also know there was at least one director in common. We also know that there was the same premises. Now, I don't want to hear about those things because we already know about those. But if there is anything else that you know about, for example, the same phone number, or some other thing that's the same, emails going to one, sent to one, actually being received by that, any of those kinds of things, anything else that you can tell us about that shows that there is a connection between FTC and PTC. I'll tell you the reason why it's important, because another part of the FCA's kind of line of defense for the building societies is, well, actually, even if these building societies knew about the Family Trust Corporation, they could never have guessed that the Family Trust Corporation would then hand over to the Philips Trust Corporation, which was really the same organization. If we can say that actually there was plenty of evidence that it was the same organization, they could and should have known this, that may help.
Thank you for focusing the minds so well, Mark. We're going to go to Karen. Karen, thank you. Please take yourself off mute, Karen Kaywood. And then we're going to go to Robert, and then to Alan, and then we'll limit it at just Karen, Robert, and Alan. Karen, over to you.
Yeah, well, I know Mark's sort of not advocating the DSAR request to crawl, but without that crawl information, I wouldn't have been able to establish a link between the FTC and PTC and the fact that they were using the same CRM at the time.
Karen, can I just come in and say, for clarity, I'm exceptionally grateful that you did that. And because you did it, we now know it was the same database and the same people operating it. But because we now know that, we don't need 20 other people to do the same thing just to run across the crawl.
I appreciate that. My circumstance was slightly different. I was trying to establish, as I said to call at the time, because I'm also a member of the creditors committee, that they couldn't prove that my father even had a trust with them because there were no documentation provided by Deed Bank, by Family Trust Corporation, or anybody else. Nobody was providing me with evidence that there was a trust in place. And without Kroll, I wouldn't have known that.
Karen, thank you. Mark, thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, back to yourselves.
Hello again. Sharon Harding and Hector Porter both worked in the office for the Family Trust Corporation. Sharon Harding then transferred and became in the offices of Philips Trust Corporation. Hector Porter went to work for Richard Philip Wells at a place called Fortis Law in Burntwood, I think it is. I've got the addresses and I've got the information that was given me from Sharon Harding to connect to Hector Porter. They were friends of each other, and in both establishments. To me, that means that they certainly did know about each other. Okay.
More than okay. Very helpful indeed, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Alan Gelsthorpe, and then we'll jump back to Mark Bishop. Alan.
Yeah, I just want to refer you back to that letter I've shown you. On it, it says, how is Taylor Rose connected to Philips? And the paragraph is, Philips is an independent branch of Taylor Rose and is trading under the name of Taylor Rose TTKW. Taylor Rose is acting on behalf of not just Philips and Philips Trust, but also FTC and the Will Writing Company. That's on that letter there.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Mark Bishop.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Some really interesting and useful stuff there. The links are deep, aren't they? And it's good that you've got letters. Please keep those letters safe, because it may be that after this, and I mean a few weeks after this, the FCA may contact you asking to see copies of this evidence. You know, hope springs eternal and all that. Shall we now move on to this next question?
Indeed. So question number 6 on the screen here. What problems have been caused by the trust arrangements put in place by the family or Philips Trust Corporation? Mark, what we'd like to say to focus the mind on this And then
Okay,
we'll
so I'll
take
explain
maybe-
to you. Sorry, I'll explain to you why we've got this question. And the reason is, to be honest with you, we want to make the case to the FCA that there have been huge consequences for individuals. Those consequences can be personal and emotional. You know, I can't move house. You know, my father that was dying of cancer had his final months having to worry about this, those kinds of things, you know, as well as the practical and financial ones. So I don't want to take anybody into a too dark a place. You know, your mental health matters to us. But if you are happy to talk about or willing to talk about these kind of things, it would be helpful if we could just do it for a few minutes in order to get on the recording, you know, some of the human consequences that there have been.
Thank you very much, Mark. We're going to go straight to Amanda Wood. Amanda, remind us or tell us which building society and then share your thought. Thank you. Amanda. You're on mute, Amanda. Please take yourself off mute first. Easy to do.
Sorry. Nottingham Building Society, Margaret Astle, Grenville Astle. Both my parents have become deceased during the last 2 years, mostly due to the worry, concern, upset, anxiety of not owning their own house. Family Trust gave my mum and dad a package of their house deeds and said, you're all right, you have your deeds. So my mum and dad assumed that they actually owned their house. When Phillips Trust contacted me, I said, no, your name's not even on the deeds. 4 years, going nowhere, thousands of pounds worth of money, my health, their death.
Amanda, it's when you stop and think about the potential for the human suffering caused by what's happened, it really is, you know, disappointing would be the most polite word that comes to mind. This is tragic. This is tragic. Thank you for sharing that with us, Amanda. Thank you very much. Mr. David Compston, thank you for stepping forward as well. What would you like to tell us? Thank you. You'll need to take yourself off mute first, please, David. Thank you. David, you're on mute.
Am I there? Can you hear me?
You can, thank you.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of John Ledyard and David Ledyard, good friends of mine, and did do an impact statement that went to the Creditors Committee and to the court in respect to this, because my friend's mother died. She'd put her house in trust through the Leeds Building Society, formerly Leeds and Holbeck, I think it was. And the financial impact is pretty simple. Phillips Trust sold the late Mary Ledyard's house, and actually then gave the monies, the £180,000, to another client, therefore effectively leaving her with nothing. The children with nothing, my friends. So I'm representing them on the basis that one of them is a very delicate character, emotionally and psychologically, and is receiving help for that. And this situation has exacerbated it, as you can imagine. And the other one, similarly, losing sleep, hope to buy a house for himself, etc., with his partner. That's not come to fruition. So the financial impact of the question is massive, and the emotional damage is significant. I think that sort of sums that one up. Thank you.
Thank you, and well done, sir, for stepping in and helping your friends in this way. That's fantastic. You're doing that, and I'm sure it's not an enjoyable thing to do, but you're clearly doing it out of a sense of loyalty to your friends. It's great to see that. It really is. We're going to jump back to the Coopers. Over to you.
I've done it, love. Yeah. Hi. You know, since all this has come to light, it has had a detrimental effect on both mine and my husband's mental health, to the degree that we've had to go on antidepressants. We've had to go and have counselling. because of the stress that this has caused both of us. And it's almost like you're in limbo and you can't do other things because of the fear of what's going to happen, you know, with the house. So that's basically how it's affected us.
Thank you, Mrs. Cooper, for sharing that. Mr. Hodgkinson just gave a big thumb up there. He could obviously relate to what you just said very, very well. We'll be hearing from the Hodgkinsons in just a moment. But first, we're going to go to Sarah Everett. Sarah, thank you.
Hello, I'm representing my mum and my late father, and they were introduced by the Melton Mowbray Building Society in Leicestershire. My father passed away in December of 2021, and the first I came to hear about this was when I started trying to deal with the affairs. Since then, it's been just so stressful. I'm having to deal with this on my own, and actually with the help of Claire Springle. My mum is too distressed to sort of deal with this on a daily basis. They put their whole life savings as well in the trust, as well as the house. And I don't sleep because of the worry. I worry because of my mum. She still doesn't know about the savings. She still thinks they're invested because it's easier for me at this point in time to let her believe everything's okay. She's so worried about the house side of things. And, you know, she's trying to come to terms with my father's death and then finding out that the house was not as she thought and the trust wasn't as she thought. So it's just been an immense amount of stress, and I say it's the sleepless nights and not knowing where we go from now. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say, really. Just the stress levels are incredible.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm not often sort of stuck for words, but I am right now. We're going to go to the Howards. Thanks, Sarah. Mr. and Mrs. Howard, what would you like to share?
Hello. Our case isn't as terrible as the other people who have spoken, but it has been extremely stressful.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jennifer.
We had trouble obtaining financial statements, and we even sent paperwork for another Howard family in Norfolk. And like everyone else, we had trouble with the insurance. We had been paying insurance for years and hadn't realised that it wasn't covered. We've had a letter from HMRC threatening to fine us because they said our trust was registered abroad. And when I managed to speak to somebody, they said, oh, that was a mistake. And then they would sort it out, but we subsequently received another letter from HMRC with a £100 fine. So we sorted that out ourselves because I just couldn't be bothered to wait. And I must admit the HMRC were very helpful. And we've been married for 50 years and we haven't really argued that much apart from this last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Last summer, I think it was June or July, we published, so we being the Transparency Task Force, we published a document called Faces of Financial Crime, the Human Suffering Caused. And it's a collection of 22 case studies of people who in some way or another have been impacted by these kind of things. And I've been doing what I'm doing now for 7 years or so, but I can honestly tell you that hearing the sort of thing we've been hearing the last 15 minutes or so it's just heartbreaking. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And somehow We need a regulatory framework that protects people from harm, as it should do. And if for some reason it doesn't protect them from harm, it quickly and efficiently and caringly steps in to do what needs to be done to sort things out. Yeah, that's what this is all about today. That's what this is all about. We're going to go back to the Duttons.
I think my brother said it earlier, my mum and dad have lost a lot of money, obviously insurance, they were paying out insurance and it wasn't even valid. Can I just say, Lendon's got his hand up, but he's got it up physically. I don't know if he knows how to put it up virtually. I don't know if he's been noted. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that point. I'll get to the person concerned in a moment. But back to the Hodgkinsons. Thank you.
Now. Hello there. My name's Maureen. It's like the other two ladies have just said now. I've been through the same with my father. My mother and father worked all their lives, saved all the money up, and then both of them then died. So I inherited the money. And of course now the money is actually gone. We're devastated with it. They've worked all their lives, we worked all our lives. Now we've got next to nothing afterwards. It's just not right.
If I can just say that in our case, we've been through this twice. When the Family Trust Corporation ceased, Thomas Gormanley contacted us and said that they couldn't pay the taxes and it was all going to close. And we thought we'd lost it all then. So we had that period of time of losing sleep. When it happened again, I just feel it's incredibly unlucky, I beg your pardon, to have gone, when recommended by the Nottingham Building Society, to one family trust concern and it folded, and then to another trust company which was recommended by Thomas Gormley as being a sound and good place to go to. So we transferred into that. And there, if I can use two words that I've learned from the APPG, I think we call them egregious recidivists. It's listed on what I was reading on your site, and I think that sums up and what's going on completely. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. I think there's somebody who wanted to speak who hasn't been able to raise their hand digitally. Could whoever that person is, please take themselves off mute and just start speaking. Mr. Lendon, is it? Yeah. Please take yourself off mute, sir, and share your thought. Then we'll be swiftly moving on. Okay, I think there might be a bit of a challenge there. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Go for it. Okay, you've taken yourself off mute. Now please speak. Thank you. Oh, I think we've got a bit of a glitch there. I'll come back to you as soon as I can, when I can. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We're going to move things along quite quickly to squeeze as much in as sensibly as possible. Folks, what I propose we do from here on is we limit it to 2 respondents per question where we need to talk about the question. There are some questions where, frankly, we don't need to talk about the question. We're going to jump back to Mark Bishop to reflect on what's been discussed and talk about the next question, which I'll get onto the screen now. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Andy. I just want to say to everybody, thank you for being prepared to talk about the emotional impacts on you. And also, I notice in the chat that Claire Springle has talked about what the financial and practical impacts are. And I think we'll find a way of capturing that information and making sure it goes to the FCA as well. What we'll probably do is do a redacted version of the chat to give to them. I think that probably the most important question that comes out of question 7 is, who do you blame here? Are you blaming the building societies? Are you blaming the family trust PTC people? Are you blaming both? How do you apportion this?
Thanks, Mark. So we'll take a maximum of 2 respondents to this question. The first of which is Christine. Christine, now to you. Please take yourself off mute, Christine. Thank you.
Hi, my hand up was to the emotional question previously, so you can ignore this.
Okay, I will do. Thanks for your understanding and helpfulness there, Christine. Would anybody like to come in on the question of Which of the companies do you blame for these problems, or are they both responsible? If not, we can swiftly move on. I think we're going to swiftly move on to question number 8, which I'll get on my screen now, and Mark will talk about the significance and importance of it in just a second. Slideshow, oops, bear with me. Share screen. Mark, to you for question number 8, please. There we go. Mark, thank you. You're on mute, Mark.
Sorry, I apologise. So you can see what the question is. Did you raise concerns with either firm, whether prior to the handover or after the insolvency of PTC? And by either firm here, I apologise, it's not worded very well. What we mean is, did you raise concerns, for example, with FTC, PTC, or with the Building Society? And if so, what was the response?
Thanks, Mark. Would anybody like to come in on that particular point? If not, we can swiftly move on. We are going to go to Amanda Wood. Amanda, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I phoned up Nottingham Building Society on the premise that they had introduced my parents, and I wanted to know where they stood in all of this. They said they didn't know anything about it whatsoever, but then a month later sent a letter from Nottingham Building Society and put it on their own website that this was nothing to do with them, but they did know that Taylor Rose had taken over all of the lists, and it would be those that we would need to contact.
Thank you, Amanda. We're going to move swiftly on to, oh, no, we're not. We're going to go to Gillian and then to the Howards. Gillian, thank you.
Yes, Nottingham Building Society. I can't tell you how many letters I've actually written to them. And each time it's like you're being fobbed off every single time you contact them. And it seems to be the norm that they say to you at the end of each letter, if you're not happy with this, you can always contact the Financial Ombudsman. And I know other people that are in the same boat. So it's as if they're just not being responsible for anything. So I contacted the Financial Ombudsman and they agreed with the Nottingham Building Society. I'm not sure that I actually got a fair hearing with the Financial Ombudsman, because they certainly didn't phone me. Whether they phoned the Nottingham, I haven't got a clue. So yeah, I've written so many letters over the past year, it's unbelievable. That's
Gillian,
all, thank you.
Thank you for doing that, and thank you for telling us about it. We're going to go to the Howards. Jennifer.
Hello there. Sorry, I'll be as quick as I can with this. We verbally complained to the Newcastle Building Society staff, and were told that that we had found out that the family trust had ceased trading, and they said it was nothing to do with them and they couldn't help with. We went back again after a couple of weeks and we're given this headline paper with the name Taylor Rose on. So we contacted Taylor Rose, and that was how we got introduced to the Phillips Trust. But after the Phillips Trust went into liquidation, the Newcastle Building Society had an AGM, and I submitted a written question to be discussed, but you know, asking why they didn't help and why did they think it was all right to sell us these products and introduce us to these companies. And of course it wasn't read out, but I was contacted and had a telephone call, and then I put a formal complaint in. I got a letter back saying they couldn't uphold my complaint, but they also mentioned that they had sent us a letter in between November 2018 and January 2019, saying that they had established a subsidised trustee reassignment service. So that means they knew we had a trust at that time, but then they just said they couldn't help with anything.
No, so couldn't contact with somebody for the finances from the court, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand why the Newcastle Building Society had contacted him to contact us. And this was done on Newcastle Building Society's premises at Ashington Station Road. And, you know, he said, I'll just kind of help you. He says, I don't know why, but put me in touch with you. But,
we also did the data search, and none of that was mentioned in the data search about any appointments, any letters, nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Howard, once again. Okay, we're going to jump to question number 9, which we may well have sort of covered already. So I'm going to share my screen once again. Mark's going to tell us the importance of it, which is pretty self-evident, really. Mark.
Yeah, so I apologise, my error. We have effectively already covered it, which is complaints to the complaints to building societies, and we have seen a lot of that in the questionnaires, to be fair. So I'm just going to make a really important point to you. If you've complained to your building society and you received a response, it's something that's known colloquially as a decision letter. It says, we've investigated, this is our decision. If you receive one of those, you have normally 6 months maximum to escalate the matter to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and thereafter you may lose that right. So I just want to say to you, if you've made a complaint of this sort in the last 6 months, please complain to the Financial Ombudsman Service before the 6 months is out. If more than 6 months has passed, you may still possibly be allowed to complain to the Financial Ombudsman Service and have your complaint considered. One of the circumstances that may be extenuating and help you to get that extension would be if the decision letter does not contain a paragraph that says you have the right to appeal this matter to the Financial Ombudsman Service. If they've done that, and I suspect some of them have, I've seen some, the FCA should be interested in this as well, because it is a very significant departure from how the complaints process is supposed to work. So that's a little bit about the Ombudsman, but otherwise I think we've covered complaints to the building societies.
Mark, thank you very much. And just in case there's any additional information, we're going to go back to Andrea and then to George Moore for the first time. George Moore. Andrea, anything very briefly to add on this complaints to building societies piece? Please take yourself off mute. I know it's not so easy on your phone.
Yeah, sorry, it's on a small iPad. Sorry, Andrea again. Just to say, I've had lots of correspondence with the building societies, and I'm not being fobbed off. I've currently got a 22-page letter in with a further 80 questions, and I know that I've got them rattled. But one of the things that I've established through all my communications is that all of the building societies had a contract with the will writing company, but no contract with Family Trust Corporation. And they're kind of denying any relationship with the Family Trust Corporation, which is absolutely rubbish, because we've all given you evidence that obviously they did have a relationship with them, which to me makes them negligent in that alone, that they didn't have a contract. And because they didn't have a contract, no due diligence was carried out. I've also looked on the money laundering regulations register, and I cannot see the will writing company or the Family Trust Corporation registered on that register. And I think that's illegal in itself. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for saying it again, and thank you for being so succinct again. This is really powerful stuff, folks. It really is. The amount of evidence coming to the surface here is truly remarkable. Mr. George Moore, which building society? Then share your thought. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, far away.
Yeah, I'm George Moore, and it's Leeds Building Society, and I've made several correspondences with them. The Ombudsman has just sort of ignored what I've said. I've sent copies of letters that I've got, and I've got part of a paragraph here, and it's telling me to actually, this is from year 2018, to get in touch. They've given me the number and everything of Taylor Rose, and they're stating that Taylor Rose had purchased along with Phillips Trust, has recently purchased the assets and database of the Will Writing Company and the Family Trust Corporation. As you know, Taylor Rose will now service future requirements of all Family Trust customers. I therefore kindly ask you to contact Taylor Rose to take this up further. And they've actually given me Taylor Rose contact number. I have contacted Taylor Rose, and they're still to this day denying emphatically that they had any sort of relation with, they had taken any database or anything like that. They're just denying it. And the Leeds Building Society last sent me a letter when I've been in, which is dated 3rd of January, and they denying any responsibilities they have with anybody else who's been on. And they're actually saying, Taylor Rose stating that Phillips Legal and Phillips Trust Corporation acquired the will writing company and family trust corporation assets database. Phillips Legal was an independent branch of Taylor Rose that continued to trade under the name of Taylor Rose. So they're actually saying that the family trust corporation is trading under the name of Taylor Rose, which, you know, I just can't understand any of it.
Thank you, George. I think that's potentially a very significant point you've brought to our attention. Thank you very, very much indeed, Mr. Moore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to swiftly move on. I'm going to share my screen once again. Now, some of the questions we've got are less important and less significant than others, okay? So question to number 10 is one of those. The question is, have you raised concerns with the Financial Ombudsman Service? And if so, what was the response? To help us manage the time, if you've got anything you're itching to say about that, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, we're going to quickly move on to question number 11. So quickly raise your hand if you wish to. Karen has done. Karen, tell us about what you'd like to share in relation to the question, have you raised concerns with the Financial Ombudsman Service? Karen, to you. Thank you. Please take yourself off mute. Karen's on mute.
Yeah. Essentially, when I wrote to the Financial Ombudsman, they just wrote back saying they told you to write to the SRA on behalf of Taylor Rose. So that was it, a one-line email. And I wrote back to them saying that they were completely wrong, and I never got an answer.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Thank you. I'm going to skip forward. So we're now going to go to question number 11. Here's question 11. Slideshow. Question number 11 is, here we go, is have you raised concerns with the Financial Conduct Authority? And if so, what was the response? Does anybody have anything they are itching to say about what happened when they contacted the Financial Conduct Authority? If I don't see a hand going up, I'll move on to number 12. 2 hands have gone up. So we've got Karen, and then we've got the Hodgkinsons. Karen, share your thought. Thank you.
My parents' MP actually wrote to the Financial Conduct Authority, and they wrote back saying if I've got any concerns, write to the Building Society or write to. They just sent me around in a circle, basically.
Right. Thank you. Very, very clear.
Taylor Rose again, actually, is where they sent me.
Very, very clear, Karen. Thank you. We're going to go to Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson. Then we're going to hear from Claire Springle again. Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, thank you.
Yes, I've switched on, but we've still got question 11 on the screen. We did contact the Financial Conduct Authority immediately after our drawdown monies stopped being paid by the Phillips Trust Corporation. Why we contacted the FCA was because we'd been in touch with the police, and Stacey Nolan of Manchester CID recommended we contacted the Financial Conduct Authority. She also recommended Claire Springle, which we also contacted. The FCA took a lot of information. We sent many scans of pages to them of the goings on since the Nottingham Building Society recommended us to start this. We asked the FCA if they could advise us or give us information about what was going on, and the FCA pretty well said to us that because of the Data Protection Act, they couldn't tell us anything. And I got absolutely no positive help or information from them, except for one sentence from one gentleman. I think I've sent the numbers of the FCA communications on my report to yourself. The gentleman said to us, what I said was, well, look, if you can't give us any advice and you can't tell us anything, what would you do if you were in our situation? And he said, well, Mr. Hodgkinson, I would try and find out where the money has been invested and, you know, the trust funds have gone to. I'd try and find out yourself. Well, we tried to find out ourselves, and we got in touch with Maya, which was one of the investment companies that PT, Phillips Trust Corporation, used in Manchester. They're in the same office, incidentally. Maya eventually told us that that their contracts had all been cancelled. The monies had been returned to Phillips Trust Corporation. I asked them, can you tell us where it's been moved on to? And the gentleman said, I've got not privy to that information, can't help you any further. So since then, we understand it's from our reports and statements from Family Trust. It's with Chris Corvain at CX Wealth. That's where it ended up. But the FCA, to me, it seems to be a criminal's charter, this Data Protection Act. You can't get to know anything. Anyway, good luck with that one.
Mr. Hodgkinson, thank you very much. Other people have said very similar things. Mr. Lendon, I can see your hand is up. I will come to you, okay? I will come to you. I can see your hand is physically up. We're going to hear briefly from Claire, then from Mark, then from Mr. Lendon. Actually, we're going to go Claire, then Mr. Lendon, then Mark. Claire, thank you.
Yeah, my experience was very similar to Mr. Hodgkinson in that I contacted the FCA, I think back in 2021, gave them an awful lot of information, sent them emails of information across, and it was basically a case of thank you very much for the information, but we can't tell you anything. And I haven't heard anything more at all. It was a complete one-way street of information, absolutely no follow-up.
I can just imagine how frustrating that is to you as a solicitor. Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Mr. Lendon, please share your thoughts. Thank you.
Hello, it's actually Mrs. Lendon.
I'm so sorry. I'm so
it's
sorry.
All right, it's okay.
Thank you.
Exactly the same as the previous two callers. I was told that they couldn't divulge any information, that this is the FCA, and that was it. But I did find out, they did tell me to try and find out where the money was invested, and I did, and it's CX Wealth, the same as the other gentleman that was speaking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I contacted CX Wealth. I rang Christopher Corvain to find out, and this was at the time when the trust was going into administration, and to find out really, is our money safe? And he couldn't give me a yes or a no.
Thank you, Mrs. Lendon. Thank you very much indeed.
But both me and my sister were so upset.
I can just imagine. I can just imagine, and the reasons why.
Because it's our late mother's money.
Yeah. Yeah. You wouldn't often think there's like an emotional dimension to money, but there is. I can relate to that.
Because it's hard. Because it's hard-earned money.
It's hard-earned money from loved ones. I can get that, Mrs. Lendon. I really can. Thank you so much for stepping forward for us today and being here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very quickly from Mr. David Compston, please, then to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quickly. Yeah, I sent all the scanned information to the FCA, and they were very nice, very kind, polite, and they said that they couldn't say anything. They were being investigated, though. That was the only they were under review, and that was the end of the matter. So I thought that actually I'd get something back that said, we've come to some investigation solution here, and this is what it is. So that's all it was. But they did say they were under investigation.
That's interesting. That's good to know, because they obviously were aware there could have been an issue. Thanks, David. Mark.
Okay, I'm going to make one point for the video so the FCA hears it, and then I'm going to ask a question of the people who sent information to the FCA. So the point I'm going to make for the video is this. It seems that the FCA asked several of you to go and investigate what had happened to your money. Now, PTC, Phillips Trust Corporation, is either an FCA authorised firm or an appointed representative of an FCA authorised firm. I don't remember which. It's easy to find out. That means the FCA has the powers to go in and ask the questions. It seems to me if it didn't choose to ask the questions, but instead asked you to ask the questions, that is somewhat negligent on its behalf. The other thing I was going to do is to ask a question of you, and it's this. When you sent them this information, did it include information that either demonstrated that the building society knew about the trust, or that the building society was endorsing the Family Trust Corporation, or both? And the reason why I ask that is that I would never divulge confidential, correspondence. But in the run-up to this meeting, long before this meeting was envisaged, the APPG was in correspondence with the FCA about the Philips Trust Corporation business. And it asked the kind of questions you'd expect it to ask. And in response, it was told the things that I've mentioned to you. For example, the building societies never endorsed this firm, and the building societies only introduced, the FCA to the will writing company, could not have envisaged that it would end up with family trusts. If you've provided evidence that proves that both of those things are untrue, then as a minimum, the FCA has an internal communications problem, or actually it has a dishonesty problem in that it's actually lied to an APPG, which is a very serious matter. Now, we have no evidence that it deliberately lied. So at this point, probably the most you can say is there may be an internal communications problem whereby the person who wrote to the APPG didn't know about the information that was already inside of the building because of you guys providing it. So just for clarity, because it will be used in follow-up discussions, I suspect, I would like to know whether you definitely were able to demonstrate in the evidence you gave to the FCA, firstly, that that they knew that the trusts were being set up, and secondly, that they were endorsing these firms.
Thank you, Mark. That's crystal clear. Would anybody that's just spoken about their interaction with the FCA like to respond to the point that Mark has just raised? I can't see any hands going up on that, so we're going to move on. Oh no, Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson. Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, to you, thank you.
Yeah, it's just that we sent so much information. There was a few hundred pages of stuff, and I can't remember it all without looking through it, and there's no way I can do it at my fingertips. Would it be all right? I've written the question down for that gentleman for us to look into what we did say to the FCA. I've got copies of what I sent them, and then to send that to you. Would that be all right?
Yes, please. That would be very helpful indeed, Mr. Hodgkinson. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'm going to share my screen once again, and we're going to nudge things forward. We're all doing very, very well. Thank you for everybody's patience and persistence in dealing with this very, very important matter. So the next question is, do you believe you've been treated fairly or unfairly by your building society? The important bit is the bit that Mark's put in red underneath. If you believe you have been treated unfairly, please explain specifically why you hold that view. We'll take just up to a couple of people on that. If you want to come in, we'll raise your hand. We're going to, it's the name on the screen is Louise Cowan, but I've got a feeling it's not going to be Louise speaking. Louise, or your colleague, your partner, your husband, whoever it is, please share your thought. Thank you.
Eric will start.
Can you hear?
Yeah, we can. Great, go for it. Thank you very much for being here. Go for it.
In answer to your question, have we been treated fairly? I think, judging by hearing everybody else's evidence, and my evidence is exactly the same. When I went into a local branch, I was sort of collared and asked if I would want these products, and I would go over old ground here. But I, in fact, think we were actually in an age group and we were actually targeted. And I think if you look at the number of people that's been on this meeting today, we are all of an age. And I think it might be hard to prove that the building societies actively targeted people of retiring or near retiring age who may be interested in wills, etc., etc. And I just want to make that point.
Can I say that my husband, the reason Eric is speaking is he was the one who went into the building society to perform an innocuous transaction. We did not seek this out. We would never have done this in a million years. And it was strongly suggested to us that it was a really good idea and it would be beneficial to us, especially because our daughter lives abroad. So we would never in a million years have taken on this at all. And like everybody else, we wish we hadn't, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much indeed. Thank you. Amanda Wood, to you.
Hi, as I say, both my parents went in, they were told it was the best thing that they could do. They trusted their building society. They only had 2 bank accounts, one with the building society, one with a bank. and they implicitly believed everything that they were told. They were in the 80s. They'd got adult children that the trust was supposed to be the beneficiaries of. They didn't need a trust in the first place. As soon as my mum found out that they'd been duped or conned or scammed or whatever the word they want to use, my mum took all of her funds out of Nottingham Building Society and moved it to the bank.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And we've got one more from Katie Cairns. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your surname, Katie. But please take yourself off mute, and you've got your camera on as well. Even better. Thank you, Katie.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Katie Cairns. I'm representing both my parents, who are also, they're in their mid-70s. And it's just really to reiterate that I absolutely agree with what's been said, that these people were approached due to their vulnerability, the cash money that the building societies had, the visibility that these people had. My parents were approached by Newcastle Building Society at the time that my father retired, and took a decent redundancy payment at the same time. Newcastle Building Society were aware of bonds and investments they had with Prudential and with Sterling, and they preyed on the vulnerable and of people of a certain age that they knew they could convince to go down this route. And I think they've absolutely let these people down in this way. It's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking to see everybody going through it because of these building societies. Because if anybody had knocked on the door, a salesperson, a phone call, these people would not have went anywhere near these companies. It's pure, for my parents, they've been with Newcastle Building Society for over 40 years. And had anybody else approached them with these type of trust funds, they would have ran a million miles.
Katie, I think you've made that point brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. And thank you very much, Katie, for making the point and for making it so well. Thank you.
Hello, can I say something?
Please do, Mr. Spooner, go for it.
Right, I haven't been on before, but I agree with everything that people have said. We're in exactly the same position. Newcastle Building Society, we went in at the finalisation of our mortgage. We were introduced to Will Writing Company, which followed on to the Family Trust, because it was all in this thing called the Estate Planning Group Holdings. And just one thing followed another. It was like night followed day. It was an absolute, from start to finish. And then when you think about it, we were never said, well, really, a trust is not for you. If you have a house which is worth £200,000, trusts are for big things, not for small family things. And we were never told about the demise of the family trust and how the Phillips Trust would take over. And it seems like such a great big contract for us all. And yes, I agree, the demographic is all people coming to the end of their mortgage, over 70-year-old, they're all in the same demographic. And I think we have been targeted. And all right, we can be accused of a certain, well, quite a lot of naivety. But when you think about it, when I walked out from Newcastle Building Society, I thought, oh, my house is secure. I've got some money for the kids when I go. The local council won't get it to pay for my health. That's grand. I never thought for one moment I didn't own the house anymore. That was never explained to me, and it should have dawned on me, because I until I retired, I was a chartered quantity surveyor. So, you know, and I've worked for administrators as an expert. And Kroll, I think, have done a wonderful job. You know, I know it's been slow, but they must have had a huge amount of things to sort out. And my congratulations go to Kroll, and they have to be paid. But I don't see why we should pay for them. If you think the six companies, 6 building societies, And I think the government should have a contribution, because they are taking, on my invoice alone, they're taking £700 off in VAT. I think if you divide that into the £3 million accrued costs so far, I think each party would be paying about £500,000. And I think that's fair. I really do.
Thank you very much.
Anyhow, that's all I wanted to say. I've got that off my mind. Thank you very much.
And thank you for saying it. And thank you for saying it. I've just noticed a comment that Peter Grant MP's put in the chat. I'm going to read it out. He says to Richard, Richard, don't accuse yourself of naivety. If we tell people not to trust the building society they've been with for 40 years, who can we trust? Well said, Peter. In the interest of time, I'm going to have to move us forward, and hopefully we'll hear from Nikki just shortly on another question, or even jumping back to this one. But I need to manage everybody's time as best as I possibly can today. So the next is a very specific question. Have you raised concerns with the Building Societies Association or any other body? And if so, what was the response? So have you raised anything with the Building Societies Association or any other body that's not been mentioned? Please raise your hand and talk to that point now if you have. Andrea, as succinctly as possible. I know you do succinct really well. Go for it.
Yeah, I raised a complaint with the Building Societies Association, but they actually have told me that they do not accept complaints, as we are neither a complaints body or regulator. So it's probably not worth anybody else doing that. I have raised complaints with MPs, FCA, the Treasury, media, and Action Fraud, and Greater Manchester Police as well.
Fantastic. You're a tour de force, Andrea. You really are. We're going to go to Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson succinctly, and then to Sarah Everett succinctly. Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, thank you.
Yes, we raised it elsewhere. One of the places, my wife said, oh, we've got insurance with More Than for the house. Could we use their legal services that we've been paying for? Went through More Than. They turned it down, went to the ombudsman, they threw it out. So we couldn't get any legal advice, even though we've been paying for it out of the insurance company. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, it is okay. Thank you very much indeed. Sarah, to you. Thank you. And then to Karen, then we'll swiftly move on. Thanks, Sarah.
Sorry. Yeah, we contacted Action Fraud, so we made connections with them, didn't really get very far, but we also made contact with Greater Manchester Police, and they've sort of put everything on hold now until Kroll have finished their investigations.
Great. Thank you very much for telling us. And to Karen Kaywood. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, I raised complaints with everybody. Andrea raised complaints with virtually, apart from the Building Society Association, but also Taylor Rose, because due to their involvement. And they just fobbed us off and said, right, to the SRA, if you're not, but the SRA, they're just not interested. They're even less cooperative than the FCA and the FSO, I think.
Thank you very much, Karen. Very quickly from Mr. Nightingale. Ian?
Yeah, I think just the comment about Greater Manchester Police and then the Action Fraud, that to my understanding, Kroll have now done their investigations into the director's conduct, and that obviously they won't say, yes, we've concluded it now. Greater Manchester Police won't confirm whether they've received any reports from Kroll. So you know, it's a strange situation we're in. Kroll have said, yeah, they're duty bound to do a report, but nobody will confirm whether they've received it.
Thanks, Ian. Very, very clear indeed. And very, very, very succinctly from Mr. Compston. To you, sir. Once you're off mute, thank you. Please unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, there was a change in direction a little bit there towards fraud, etc. And my thoughts were, you did give a preamble to say the scope of this actual meeting, which is the focus on the building societies and any tort there, any wrongdoing or whatever, mis-selling, whatever, and to see whether there was sufficiently serious concerns that can then be forwarded and towards some action. Does it have a feed into any other group where that would effectively change any legislation, effectively deal with the actions towards fraud, effectively deal with negligence, effectively deal with vulnerable adults? Because I think one of the comments earlier was, this is probably happening now.
Yeah.
And there were MPs on this call that would be gravely concerned with that.
David, thank you very much for raising this. I'll deal with it really quickly. There are two major pieces of legislation that Parliament's focused on at the moment. People like Peter Grant and David Simmons and Bob Blackman and others are really interested in all of this. One is the Economic Crime Bill, and the other one is the Financial Services and Markets Bill. And we could speak, believe me, for hours on both of those, but we haven't got time to today. But rest assured, the kind of parliamentarians who are members of the all-party parliamentary group really do care and really are taking every opportunity they can to change the rules and the legislation to fix things for the future. I absolutely categorically assure you of that. Thank you very much indeed, David.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Jennifer has just raised her hand. We've not heard from Jennifer before, so I'm going to go to Jennifer just for a very short time. Jennifer, please share your thought. Thank you.
Yes, I'm from Newark. The Building Society is Nottingham, and I would like to know that you were just saying that Parliament has two bills in front of them or something like that, to that effect. What I'd like to know is, can it be retroactive to us if it goes through, if we get a good thing? Result?
Thank you, Jennifer. My sort of non-legal, I'm not a lawyer, my comment is there's already more than adequate legislation in place to enable people like the people on this call to have been dealt with fairly. There's already very powerful application in place. It's a case of, has the rule book that we've already got been applied effectively? And many people will say no. Mark Bishop might be one of those. Mark.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to answer Jennifer's question by actually giving you the reason why we were asking you one of the questions earlier. One of the questions we asked earlier was, do you think you've been treated fairly or unfairly by your building society? The reason why we asked you that question is that every FCA authorised firm, and all building societies are FCA authorised, is required to abide by its principles for business, which is a set of, I think there are 11 principles that they are required to honour in the way they conduct themselves. And one of them is treat customers fairly. Another one is that all communications have to be fair, clear and not misleading. There are others as well. But treating them fairly is the most important one, actually, TCF as it's known. And if we can demonstrate that you have been treated unfairly by the building society, it gives the FCA the right to enforce against that building society. Enforcement can mean fines, it can mean banning some of the directors, it can mean removing permissions to conduct regulated activities, all of which are of academic value to us. But one of the others is it can issue restitution orders, or under certain circumstances impose redress schemes. And the restitution one is the most interesting one because it can require a firm to pay money to certain parties, and those parties might be you. That power exists now, it's existed for years. And of course, if this video persuades the FCA that there are reasonable grounds to believe that you have been treated unfairly by your building society, it should launch an investigation. And if the evidence is as we hope that it is, it would then have the power to issue these restitution orders. It doesn't have an obligation to do it at the moment, and we wish that that would change. For example, we wish that you could sue the building society if it chose not to enforce or issue restitution order. No, so if you could sue the FCA if it chooses not to do that, and therefore you lost money. But that power doesn't currently exist. We don't have it as consumers. So we are reliant on trying to persuade the FCA to go and get you the restitution order that would result in the building societies compensating you. We don't know if we will succeed or not, but frankly, it's our best shot.
Thank you very much, Mark. As always, your knowledge is so helpful, so helpful. Okay, we are going, excuse me, we are going to move swiftly on, and we're going to manage time really, really preciously for the next sort of 10 minutes or so. I'm keen that we do try to finish at 3 p.m. If we have to go beyond that, we will, but I'm trying to finish at the sort of originally expected time. Do you believe the Financial Ombudsman Service or the Financial Conduct Authority have treated you fairly if you've had dealings with them? And please give specific examples. Would anybody like to raise their hand at this point and come in here? If not, we can swiftly move on. But has anybody got anything they'd like to talk about in relation to whether the Financial Ombudsman Service or the Financial Conduct Authority have treated you fairly? This is like one of those auction things, going, gone. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to the next one. Number 15. Have your experiences led you to be distrustful of or less likely to do business with the UK financial services industry? This is a really important question. Mark, could you explain the significance of this? Thank you.
Yeah, the reason why this is here, frankly, is political. At the moment, as Andy said, this new bill is going through Parliament, Financial Services and Markets Bill. It wants to, amongst other things, encourage regulators to improve economic growth and competitiveness of our economy, and particularly of our financial services. Some people think that that means that there could be even more lax regulation than there is, and that firms could get away with pretty much anything as long as it's profitable. But actually, this rule can work the other way, because it could actually require the regulator to be more proactive to prevent situations in which consumers are losing confidence in the financial services industry, for example, because there are too many scandals going on. So it would be helpful if we could persuade the FCA very briefly in this video that actually consumers are changing their behaviour and are avoiding financial services firms because they feel that it's too risky, that it's too poorly regulated, that there are too many sharks out there, that kind of thing. Sounds like I'm leading you. I don't want to lead you, but I want you to say what you honestly, not just what you think, but what you have done. What you've done is more interesting. So if you have specifically chosen not to invest some money because of, you're now scared of financial services, if you've chosen not to do this or that, that's the kind of thing we want to hear about.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Amanda, then to Sean, and then we'll be moving on. Amanda.
Hi. For myself, I managed to inherit some money from my mum and dad. It's sitting in my bank. I won't invest it. I won't put it in a trust. I won't give it to any other financial, because they can't be trusted. Nobody can be trusted with my money. In fact, I was thinking of taking it out of the bank and put it under my mattress, which is a very old-fashioned way of dealing with things, but at least you've got your money.
Thank you very much. And please, whatever you do, don't go mentioning where you live, where your mattress is. Please don't. Thanks very much indeed, Amanda. I get your point entirely. We're going to hear from Sean, then from Gillian, then from Jennifer, then we're going to swiftly move on as succinctly as you can, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly. I think from my own perspective and that of my wife, we have definitely changed the way in which we look at financial institutions. We are far, the gentleman earlier mentioned about being naive. Well, if we are naive, I think these people are incredibly clever in the way that they have presented so much information to us that actually it was incredibly plausible. Everything that we were given led us down the path of saying this is the right thing to do. And the pitfalls, it comes back to one essential thing for me. If we had not been introduced in the first place to these unregulated companies, we would not be in this mess.
Well
we would
said,
not have gone down that route.
Well said, Sean. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Carroll. Gillian, to you.
Yes, I'm just going to read what I've written down. Extremely distrustful of the UK financial services. I feel I've been let down, sold down the river at every turn. No one's accepting any sort of responsibility for this fiasco. None of our faults. I trusted my building society. You trust them like you do a bank. And I've been a member for several years. I expected nothing but clarity and honesty. And I didn't get that at all.
Thank you, Gillian. Well said, Gillian. Well said, Gillian. From Gillian to Jennifer. Jennifer.
Yes, I just want to say I agree thoroughly with Sean. And also, I would like to say 3 times I asked people at Phillips Trust whether my money's safe and is it covered by any insurance. And they insured me, the government covered my money up to £85,000 3 times.
Interesting. That's
Yes,
really interesting to know.
the people, Linda McDonald and James McAdam, those 2 people, 3 times.
I'm so glad that point's been made. I hadn't thought of that. I'm so glad you've made that point, Jennifer. Thank you very, very much. That's potentially remarkably significant. We're going to go to thank you. We're going to go to the next question, which is also, I think, the last question. What would you like the Building Society's Financial Ombudsman Service or Financial Conduct Authority to do now to resolve the problems created by FTC and PTC? And as Mark says in the red note, focus especially on the FCA, since the FCA is the intended recipient of this evidence session and has the power to direct authorised firms to provide redress, which is what Mark was speaking about just a few moments ago. So would anybody like to raise their hand and as succinctly and as straightforwardly as possible, tell us what you think needs to happen now, particularly what should the FCA do? Amanda, what should the FCA do? And then we'll go to George Moore, who's not George Moore, it is George Moore. Amanda. Once you're off mute, please, Amanda, thank you. Amanda.
Sorry, push for legislation and ensure that other people aren't put in the same horrible situation where you can't get out of.
Yeah, well said, Amanda. Beautifully put. Mr. Moore. Oh, I think you might have accidentally.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go for it, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, no, I just think we should be compensated. All I would like out of it, as my house put back in my own hands, and to cover the losses that I've cost in money and just forget about it all and make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody else in the future.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing.
In a moment, I'm going to be asking Peter Grant to say a few words, if he'd like to, before he has to disappear. So after we've heard very briefly from Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, we might be hearing from Peter Grant before we move on.
You don't think you could just read a paragraph? I missed out thinking it'll take
because we don't have time. I'm going to have to say no, sir. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
that's okay. Mr. and Mrs. Hodgkinson, then we'll hopefully go to Peter Grant. Thank you.
We think the Financial Conduct Authority and also the Police Fraud Agency are both ineffective, and they seem to get the information from us and put it in files. They give you reference numbers, and then they do sweet, not a lot. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your politeness as well, for your sweet, not a lot. Mr. Grant, if you're there, sir, Peter Grant MP, if you're able to come to the session again.
Yeah. Oops.
I'm here, Andy. Just give me a second. I'll turn that phone speaker so I'm not drowning myself out. Okay. Yeah. I've been able to listen in for the last hour and 3/4 or so. So thanks again to everybody that's given their time to contribute. A couple of thoughts of mine. First of all, I'm not an expert in financial law, financial services. So in that regard, I'm speaking as a layperson. It does strike me that a lot of what has been described today sounds very like people being given financial advice by organisations that had absolutely no right to be giving that financial advice. That is something that, if I'm correct, the Financial Conduct Authority can't not do something about, because one of their sort of principal purposes is to deal with firms that give financial advice that they're not authorised to do, or to give it in a way that is beyond the appropriate codes of conduct. For example, if somebody recommends that you transfer your money to a different company and don't tell you that that company has got the same shareholders, that they're a director of that company, that's against the rules. So the Financial Conduct Authority shouldn't just be saying nothing to do with USGov. I've done quite a bit of digging about in Companies House records. I can't find any of the companies that's been mentioned either today or in other correspondence I've seen about the Phillips Trust Corporation that doesn't have a significant number of common directors or common shareholders or common owners with one or several of the other companies that have been mentioned. It's almost certain that if these companies were big enough to need to publish full accounts, they would have to declare their association with several other companies together. One or two of them actually referring their accounts to amounts that are owed to other group undertakings. So that's him admitting that there are other companies out there that have got the same ownership. I mean, you've already, some of you mentioned the names of Phillips, the Gormanleys. There's 3 Gormanleys in there. I think it's mum, dad and daughter. I can't be sure. But certainly Thomas Gormanley appears quite a lot. He also was quite closely connected to Safe Hands alongside Mr. Wells. So the connections in terms of the same directors, the same people owning them, essentially the same people that actually ran the companies. I referred to Blackmore Bond many times as a spider's web. This isn't quite as complicated. There's not sort of 30 or 40 companies involved the way there was with Blackmore Bond, but there's certainly a lot of companies that were not nearly as separate and independent from each other as they appeared. My sort of instinct is that if a company structure is set up to look more complicated than it seems to need to be, there's very often a reason for it, and it's very often not a particularly honourable reason. It's sometimes just done to protect individual companies and directors from the liabilities if the company goes down. It can be done, and there's a couple of cases in other companies, I'm absolutely certain it was done primarily to make it harder for the police, the National Crime Agency, the Financial Conduct Authority or anyone else to track where the money's going. And I know that's a major issue that the administrators having with the Phillips Trust, that the record keeping has been so bad that they literally can't track down where the money has gone to. There was mention made of some of the bits of legislation going through Parliament just now. I don't think the Financial Services and Markets Act is going to significantly improve what the Financial Conduct Authority is doing. But essentially that wasn't its purpose. We tried to get amendments put in that would tighten up some of the control. The economic crime bill that's also going through is a bit more hopeful. The additional requirements that will put on companies about the information that they publish and what happens to them if they don't publish it will make it easier in future, for example, to wrinkle out the connections between companies, the different directors, different shareholders, and so on. The final thing that I've been pushing for on both bills is for the government to recognise through legislation that there is a particular pattern that emerges. Some of it, the operators manage to just about stay within the law, but still shouldn't be allowed to. And essentially what they're doing is they're running a business, they're investing usually in very high value, but very high risk investments using your money. So they take your money off you, saying it's to invest in local building projects, or to invest in your funeral plan, or to invest in your will, to put your will money into a trust. And once you've got that money, rather than investing it in a safe place, where the single most important objective is to make sure you get your money back when it's due to you, they're investing it in places where they can potentially make a lot of profit on them, but where if it all goes wrong, you're the one that stands to lose your money. I've been trying to get the government to recognise that as a problem that applies across a lot, but looks like a lot of different kinds of companies on the face of it. But when you start to dig down behind them, you find that it's been the same kind of operating mechanism they've had. And as I mentioned earlier, it looks as if behind the facade that this was about writing wills and Safe Hands was about funeral plans. Once they've got your money, it seems to me as if the method of operating has been exactly the same. So thanks again for everybody who's taken part, and I know that at some point either the Financial Conduct Authority or possibly Transparency Task Force will be contacting a lot of you, asking you for copies of the various documents that you've read out from. I think Andy has made it clear from his reactions to a lot of it, that some of the information that you've got and the fact that so many of you have got hard and fast evidence as to what was said, it probably makes this a much more hopeful effort than some of the ones we've had previously, because some of the previous ones, all we had was phone calls and conversations and people didn't have written records of what's happened. The fact that you've got written records of it now will make a big difference. And my final point, to remind you again, if you haven't already contacted your local MP, I would recommend that you do that. Whether or not it's an MP from the party you chose, on this every MP should be looking after the interests of your constituents. And it might be, for example, that if the same MP has got several cases involving the same building society, they start chapping on the building society's door. not in the local branch, but head office if need be, and starting to make noises in Parliament and in the media about what's happened. And that can sometimes encourage a building society. It's not right that they should take it, but sometimes a few MPs beginning to mouth off about it can be what it takes a building society essentially to do what they should have been doing in the first place. But the question that asked in Parliament this morning, what I finished off by saying is, how could it be that so many building societies were so easily duped into being what may well turn out to be, well, they've certainly turned out to be accessories to something unpleasant. We might get a definitive answer at some point as to whether there was anything unlawful in it. But at the moment, I would say it's one of those situations where, although outside of parliamentary privilege, I can't say that this has been unlawful. But I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that if the law didn't say it was illegal, then the law needs to be changed to make these kind of practices illegal again. If I'm still an MP in 5 years' time, I don't want to be sitting here with another group of people who've been wiped out of their inheritance money, their funeral plan money, their pension fund, their life savings, or all the other things that people have lost. And I'm quite sure that Andy wants to be able to spend his time doing something else other than trying to chase around another set of companies to get another tens of millions of pounds back for innocent victims. Thanks again, everybody, for taking part today.
Mr. Peter Grant MP, well said, sir. Thank you very, very, very much indeed for your ongoing support and conscientiousness in trying to make sure that people are dealt with properly, respectfully, courteously, and in a trustworthy way by the financial institutions that they deal with. Thanks very much, Peter. Your input to the APPG is massive and hugely, hugely appreciated. Thank you. We're going to be finishing at 3:05, folks. So allow me the luxury of an additional 5 minutes. We're going to hear very briefly from Sean Carroll, then we're going to talk about next steps. So Sean's responding to the question we had up on the slide a minute ago, which is, what is it you really want the FCA and others to now do? Mr. Carroll, as succinctly as you can, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, this is about accountability. It's not about compensation. It's not about how do we get recompense for the emotional and the financial distress that this whole situation has caused. For me, it's definitely about accountability. Who do we go to ensure, if we can't go to the governing bodies who look after these institutions, where can we go? Fortunately, we are coming to you and you are listening, because that is crucial. We need people to listen. Therefore, for me, it comes back to that word, accountability. Because I think so many people, because of the passage of time, feel they've got away with it. And we go right back, almost 10 years or more, to the building societies. They feel with the passage of time, they can just wash their hands of this. I'm sorry, they can't.
Thank you very much indeed for making your point in such a powerful and frankly compelling way. We're going to talk about next steps. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about this. There's a step 1, then there's a step 2, then there's a step 3. So here we go, everyone. Step 1, we will continue to collate the evidence that we have been gathering from yourselves and send it to the Financial Conduct Authority. Please, 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 if you haven't yet sent us everything, if you haven't yet completed the questionnaire, get that done ASAP, and at the very, very latest by 12 o'clock on Monday. 12 o'clock Monday is the absolute deadline. We need to have a line by which we'll not take any more information. Step number 2, when we've collected all that information, sent it to the FCA, we'll let you know that we've done that, and we'll be suggesting further steps that you can take to help this collective endeavour. The sorts of things we're talking about here could include writing to your MP. For example, we might even find the time to create a little, template letter you can use and adapt, for example, to make it as easy and as straightforward as possible. Step number 3, the Financial Ombudsman. Have you complained to your building society? If so, escalate to the Financial Ombudsman service within 6 months. And of course, consider using the Facebook group to consider different complaint approaches. I'm going to pass to Mark Bishop for any final thoughts from Mark before I say some thank yous that are really very appropriate for me to say, and then we will be bringing the session to a close in literally under a minute and a half from now. Mark Bishop, any final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, just really to say thank you very much indeed, everybody, for what you said. You've been variously, really forensic in the information you provide, and also passionate in how you've described the situation and what's happened to you. And that's exactly what we were hoping for. I think what you have done is to show really well that, you are, what I call, good, decent kind of middle Englanders, people who, get on with their lives, look after their loved ones and so on, and make provision for themselves. You're the kind of people that governments want. If everybody was like you, society would be in a much better place, frankly. And you've done the right thing. And you have trusted building societies that have been in place mostly since the Victorian era to do the right thing by you. Whether through negligence or greed or dishonesty, they haven't done that. And now they're running away hoping that nobody notices. And what's worse, I think, is that the financial regulator, who has a statutory duty to make markets work properly and has an operational duty to protect consumers, including you, its characterization of what happened is actually the building society's version of events. It didn't bother checking with you to get the truth. The truth was within its building, but it didn't reference that in its early correspondence with this APPG. What it's done is it's basically said the building societies couldn't have guessed that there would be trusts. There were only wills. The building societies were not endorsing these firms. It was execution only. There was no link, between the Family Trust Corporation and the Phillips Trust Corporation. It's, entirely different organisation. The collapse of Family Trust Corporation could never have been envisaged. Well, of course, it could have been envisaged, because even if you didn't look at the fact, the obvious fact that trusts were being sold to people for whom they were wholly inappropriate. Even if you didn't look at that, simply the fact that there was a one-off lifetime fee for setting the thing up, it was self-evident that eventually the money would run out. So there are going to have to be other fees from either that organisation or another one. So all the way along, it was very easily deducible by the building society that you were going to end up with a problem. And that's what's happened. Now it and the regulator are saying, well, none of our problem, none of our business. But actually it is their business. And the FCA does have these duties, and it is accountable to Parliament. And under the new Act, it will become, we hope, slightly more accountable to Parliament. And it has got to do the right thing. And I hope that they will look at this video and say, well, actually, to put it bluntly, both the building societies and we have dropped the ball here. And the building societies trade on trust. They stand in their communities on the basis of their reputation. The right thing for the building societies to do is to compensate you. And then, as we've discussed in the chat, they then become the creditor that's handled by Kroll. And the Kroll go out and try and recover as much money as possible. And that balance of the money goes to the building societies, who will have already compensated you. But first, the building societies have got to compensate you, whether that's done voluntarily with a bit of a twist of the arm of from the FCA, or whether the FCA has to go to court and get these restitution orders. It's got to first investigate, and then it's got to get the money for you, I think.
Well, thank you very much. And that investigation process is now moving ahead so well because of the evidence that you've all very kindly, very kindly accumulated and expressed today. Some thank yous. Mark Bishop, of course. Alexandra, our head of events, has been responsible for a lot of the admin around this. Mr. Ian Nightingale, Andrea Hindley, both involved with the Facebook group. Claire Springle, the lawyer who's been helping lots and lots of you, which is great to have Claire's input. The parliamentarians, David Simmons, Bob Blackman and Peter Grant. The very last slide is in some ways the most important one, which is very simply to say thank you all very much indeed. From my point of view, this has been a successful event. I hope you feel that way as well. I hope you feel that we've taken the time to listen and to try to do what we can to get things moving. Please understand that what's going on here is being done by, quite literally by volunteers. So we'll do as best as we can with the very limited resources that we've got available. I think we can wrap the session up there. I think we ought to give ourselves a collective round of applause because I think everyone's done everything they can to make this session as successful as possible. So why don't we give ourselves a collective applause? Well done, folks. Very well done. We'll follow up as best as we can, as quickly as we can, and we'll keep each other posted. Let's work as a team. There's a really good team effort vibe going on here, and let's keep it that way. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Day. Cheers, Mark. Thanks, Andrew, Alexandra. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. 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 Thank you.